Hello. Hi. We're going to be learning about a cult leader, a cult, and a cult leader today. How cool is that? We can learn to appreciate all the things that cults do and all the qualities that a cult has. Hey. So let's get right into it. No need to pause. No need to waste any time here. Right into it.
Okay. I.
In the early 2000s, the French press began circulating an unbelievable story dubbed The Recluses of Montflanquin. It concerned 11 members of a wealthy family known as the Vidrines, who suddenly locked themselves inside of their home in an act of self-imposed isolation. The French newspaper
A rich cult. That was kind of cool. Man.
Le Monde was
One
the
day.
first to break the story with an article titled The Mystery of Montflanquin. The article contained interviews with baffled neighbors who told the paper that prior to sequestering themselves, the Vidrines were a well-liked and well-respected family in the village who had since become known as the local crackpots. The Vidrines later sued the journalist who wrote the article for an invasion of privacy and won. Those who knew the family said they started to notice their radical shift in behavior by mid-2001.
Is it acceptable to call people crackpots these days? And other bad names insulting their intelligence, I suppose.
Around that time, 11 members of the Vidrines family began to shun neighbors, friends, relatives, as well as even their own spouses and children. They accused everyone outside of their tight-knit group of secretly being Freemasons who intended to harm them and even outright kill them. On January 4th of 2002, a neighbor visited them to see what was wrong. She told Le Monde that she peered through the window and saw that, quote, they were all there, sitting motionless in the dark. The little visible light was from the dim glow of their Christmas tree. Anyone who tried to step onto their property, even the mailman, wouldn't be allowed past the gates. The family would immediately shout and warn them off. Sometimes visitors would be attacked. The question of what happened to the Vidrines, what led to their collective insanity, doesn't have any simple answers. But one thing is clear. The Vidrines were a perfectly normal family until a Rasputin-like conman named Thierry stepped into their lives.
Ooh. A guru with the gift of brainwashing. Now I'm very excited about this too. We can learn about what brainwashing means and how does that work. I'd like to dive into that a bit. Though I'm sure won't be super specific, but maybe more specific, too specific because it's about one specific case and not broad enough for us to actually comment on broadly. Okay, we got a full family tree. Hold on, let me check out the family tree in the description box here. Family tree. Okay. That's not that many people. Okay, check it out. Wait, that's not it. Check it out. We got a family tree. It's not too many people at all. So we can all remember 7, 10, 12 people, right? We can all remember 12 people. Easy enough, I think. Okay.
The Vidrines are an old family, an aristocratic family. Descending from a line of Protestant country landowners, their history in the bucolic village of Montflanquin stems back to the 17th century during King Louis XIV's reign. The family owned a summer house in Montflanquin called Chateau Martel. Chateau Martel sat perched on a hill overlooking their land, spanning 50 hectares. There's a sense of timelessness to their chateau and Montflanquin as a whole. Montflanquin, with its winding arcades and 14th century medieval buildings, looks like something out of a fairy tale. So it's no wonder why it's known as one of the most beautiful and well-preserved medieval Bastide towns in all of France. A tight-knit clan, the Vidrines often spent their summers together at Chateau Martel. Their children, who are all close in age, grew up riding bikes along the countryside, swimming in the lakes, and enjoying the idyllic paradise that is Montflanquin. They lived quiet lives of privilege. To their neighbors, they were a well-respected family of high standing who were known to organize village festivals and elaborate parties. The Vidrines were not, as one might imagine, an exorbitantly wealthy family. Instead, they were only aristocrats by name, meaning they still had to work. For example, Charles Henri de Vidrine was a gynecologist and obstetrician, as well as a former political candidate. Ghislaine was the director of a Paris-based secretarial school, and their eldest brother, Philippe de Vidrine, was a civil engineer for Shell Oil.
Okay, working
This
some good
story
jobs.
begins during the summer of 1997, when Ghislaine first met Thierry Tilly. During this time, Ghislaine was stressed and in over her head.
Terry's our guy, all right? This is our guy. He's the one who's gonna change our minds on a lot of things.
A year earlier, she was part of a group of parents who took over their children's school when it was teetering on bankruptcy and was set to shut down in the middle of the school year. They all had children who were close to finishing their studies at the school, so they figured that as long as they can keep it afloat until summer, their children could at least finish the term. Leading them was a lawyer named Vincent David, who helped them win their case against the school staff. After a victory in court over teachers vying for the same position, Ghislaine was appointed a role as the school's director. However, the elation of this small victory over the teachers did not last, as there was still a lot to be done to keep the school from financial collapse. The school's myriad issues were as follows. Its coffers were empty, its registration was plummeting, its computer system was obsolete, and it was in desperate need of maintenance. It was through Vincent David that Ghislaine first met Thierry Tilly. She was looking for a cleaning company for the school, and Vincent David recommended Tilly's company for the job. Tilly, being a plain-looking, short-statured man, didn't leave a lasting impression
That's our guru.
at first. However, as time went on, Ghislaine found herself more and more drawn to him. And that was because he made himself indispensable to her. Whenever a setback took place, Tilly was there to fix it. For example, when she mentioned in passing that the school's computer system needed to be replaced, Tilly had it sorted out by the next day. Gradually, she began to trust and depend on him as a highly competent fixer of her problems. She was also taken in by his elusiveness. She wondered who this man was who she found to be discreet, eternally busy, and one step ahead of everybody else. He was always dressed fashionably, and always moving quickly as if he had many appointments to attend to. Thierry Tilly was a complete mystery to her, so she asked her lawyer, Vincent David, about him. Vincent told her that Tilly was a highly connected man who owned 10 companies and who knew some very powerful people. When she asked him why such an influential person would spend his time helping a failing school, Vincent David told her that Tilly had taken an interest because he saw its potential. He added that Tilly was a trustworthy and philanthropic person. And what Vincent David said next would add an extra layer to Tilly's mystique. According to him, Tilly was so highly connected to influential people that the reason they were able to take over the school rather than the teachers was because Tilly intervened. After hearing that, Ghislaine began to see Tilly as a possessor of extraordinary powers, a man with enough say to influence even court proceedings. At the time, Ghislaine's son, Francois, had been facing difficulties in school, and Tilly was there to take the depressed and aimless boy under his wing in the form of an internship. He also listened to his problems and gave him advice. Ghislaine was thrilled that her underachieving son had Tilly as a mentor, and she believed that the bond her son had been forming with Tilly would bode well for his future. But what she didn't know at the time was that Tilly would go on to dominate her and her family's lives for the next 12 years. By the beginning of 1999, she hired him full-time. It was her lawyer, Vincent David, who persuaded Ghislaine to bring him on board in an official capacity. And in a little over a year, he helped the dwindling school increase its enrollment. First, he got her to rename the school from La Femme Secrétaire to IFSAD, Institution for the Formation of Superior Directorial Assistants. Along with the name change would be a change in direction, one that sought to attract international students, especially from China. In her memoir titled Diabolique, Ghislaine writes, "With Tilly's help, I am certain that we will succeed and become the great international academy we dream of. And what psychological comfort for me. The man who understands me so well, who knows how to appease and advise me, is now with us, in our team. I could not have imagined a more promising solution." By this point, Ghislaine no longer made any decisions concerning the school without first consulting Tilly, believing that her decision-making alone was insufficient. This points to something subtle but crucial to Tilly's hold on her. By leaving her decision-making up to him, it shows that from very early on, she was willing to give up her autonomy, her agency, and was trusting that he wouldn't abuse such a one-sided power dynamic.
How did he do this? And most importantly, did he plan this beforehand? Like, has he? I don't know what the whole cult is, or we gotta get into what the cult is, but this seems so elaborate. Or did it just happen to fall in his lap accidentally? How cool is that?
Spoilers, he did. Soon his salary was more than double hers, and he was being given bonuses that no other staff member was entitled to. Although his role was officially as just an assistant, he was effectively running the school and being paid the highest salary. This also left the school's coffers open for him to systematically bilk from until there was nothing left. With Ghislaine, Tilly played a long con. He spent 3 years becoming her trusted friend before making any major moves. In Ghislaine, Tilly had found the perfect mark. Like most victims of con artists and cult manipulation, she was vulnerable and in a stressful, transitory period of her life. As Stephen Hassan, one of the leading experts on the topic of destructive cults, writes, quote, "The stress is often due to some kind of major transition, moving to a new town, starting a new job, breaking off a relationship, experiencing financial instability, or losing a loved one. People in such situations tend to have defense mechanisms that are overloaded or weakened. If they don't know how to spot and avoid destructive cults, they are easy prey." Ghislaine fit this profile perfectly. She was stressed from running a school that was nearly bankrupt. She was grieving the recent deaths of her father and her older sister. That same year, her husband Jean Marchand had his magazine go bankrupt. As a result, he had his own problems, giving him a great deal of stress, and he wasn't always there to listen to her. The distance she was experiencing in her marriage left her wanting for someone to lean on. Then Tilly arrived at the perfect moment to support her. He listened to her, offered solutions to her problems, mentored her son Francois, and promised her a brighter future for her failing school.
Wow.
Whenever she could
He sounds like a real stand-up kind of guy right there, right? Man, are only the common the nice people in the world? How awful is that?
confided in Tilly, their dynamic was analogous to a patient bearing her soul to a therapist. And just like a therapist, Tilly never really shared anything about himself. Instead, he just listened. She'd share liberally, completely unaware that he was listening, not out of concern, but instead to size up his prey. He was probing her for her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, and her idiosyncrasies. And he did this all so he could better ensnare her. She was so seduced by his concern for her school and personal life that she shared everything without thinking. As she told him about her family, their conflicts, disagreements, jealousies, rivalries, values, and their hierarchical system, Tilly took mental notes and didn't forget a single word. He probed her for details. Details he would later use to manipulate her and 10 other members of her family. This is also how Tilly came to know of the properties that her family owned, as well as the bigger picture of their lives. August 2000. Thierry Tilly meets the family. Like most summers, the family spent it together at Chateau Martel. But unlike most summers, Ghislaine de Vidrine had invited an enigmatic man to spend it with them named Thierry Tilly. Inside the walls of the manor, Tilly's pending arrival was one thing on everybody's minds. According to what Ghislaine had told them about him, Thierry Tilly was an extremely intelligent and highly influential man who rubbed shoulders with those belonging to the upper echelon of society. He knew former presidents, business leaders, and possessed an address book enviable by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She let them know just how much he had changed her life and how much he could change theirs. Therefore, when Thierry Tilly arrived for dinner that night, members of the Vidrines clan had already been primed to be quickly taken in by him. Sat at the head of the table, he spoke unreservedly. He appeared to be refined, cultured, and erudite. Whatever the topic of discussion, Tilly had something insightful to say about it, and he seemed to possess an expertise in all domains. He spoke with familiarity about methods of encryption with Ghislaine's nephew Frederic, who was an engineer at Microsoft. He imparted legal advice to another family member, warning them that their property business was almost certainly illegal. With Charles Henri's son, Guillaume, he used, quote, terminology that revealed a knowledge of information technology completely inaccessible to the general public. Tilly spent the entire month of August staying in a rental house close by to the Vidrine chateau. He visited them every day and had long one-on-one chats with family members. One-on-one was Tilly's preferred method of conversation.
Mine
He was
too.
like a chameleon adjusting himself to better match his interlocutors in order to better win their favor.
Well, this is like a normal thing that a person who might be a more introvert type of kind of person feels. You know, it's a lot of energy to deal with all of other people around the room. You have to match how so many different people are at a particular time. It's very difficult. So it's much easier to be with one person at a time and really get to match their energy and have some sort of social cohesion with one person. That's how I feel about it, at least. Maybe I'm exposing myself as a chameleon and a con artist. I'm not sure.
Philippe, he used his background as a civil engineer and former member of the French army to flatter him. He would say things like, "Philippe, you were in Algeria. You've been under fire. You're the only one who understands what I'm talking about. And, Philippe, you should be the president of Shell Oil." Philippe later told Ghislaine of his admiration for Tilly, calling him a remarkable man marked by respect for tradition, yet carrying a vision for the future of humanity. But what impressed them most about Tilly was the influence he seemed to wield over courts and government agencies. It appeared to them that he was able to step in and help them overcome impossible battles, which they were sure they had already lost. One such case occurred when Ghislaine advised her brother, Charles Henri, to seek counsel from Tilly about the family's ongoing legal problem associated with the sale of one of their properties in Lacaze, which had severe structural damage. The new owners had alleged that the family had sold them the home while concealing its damage. The case was handed over to Vincent David, with Tilly playing an advisory role. Soon, the Vidrines learned that the legal suit against them had been dropped, a development which they attributed to Thierry Tilly. Another example of Tilly demonstrating his sway over official matters occurred when the music festival, which Ghislaine organized annually, was put under review due to matters concerning grants. Ghislaine worked tirelessly over the next few days, going through the festival's books and putting together a report. Just when she was about to hand it in, Tilly stopped her, telling her that he will speak to them on her behalf. An hour later, he returned, telling her that everything was in order and that she wouldn't have to pay a cent.
Wow. See, I gotta learn from this guy before I can start any temple or any groups or any collectives or anything. This guy knows what he's doing.
After winning over the rest of Ghislaine's
Some
family,
tips.
he offered them financial advice. He suggested that they allow him to review their portfolios to see if their financial investments were in the right place. Upon review, he told them that they weren't. He then implied that their financial advisors were not dependable. Tilly claimed that he could vastly increase the value of their capital if they entrust their investments with his company called Presswell Limited. Tilly advised them that he could get them 11 to 14% return on their investments per month, which he claimed to be able to do because of his insider knowledge of world markets. After a month, somehow he delivered. Going forward, he became a daily fixture in their lives. He wined and dined them at expensive restaurants in Paris and London. He let Guillaume, Charles Henri's son, stay in his condo in the center of Manhattan, while Guillaume was in New York for an internship.
So all right, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here, right? Terry Tilly seems to be very rich somehow, and he's conning this family who doesn't seem to be very rich, but he's helping them quite a bit. And I guess for 3 years or more to work to butter them up and pay for a lot of their things and give them advice, unsolicited advice for free, that is actually seems to be very helpful for them, give them favors and all this stuff. How is this? I wonder how this is going to translate and how much money he's going to get in the end of this, or if he's in it for something else, potentially. But we're just trying to keep track of this because he seems to be very well off. Why does he need to be scamming people? It doesn't make a lot of sense, financially speaking, at least.
There, he introduced the young man to a real estate billionaire named Charles F., who owned some 20 high-rise buildings in Manhattan and was one of the most influential property developers in New York. Tilly seduced them with the promise of money, investments, connections, and of an easy gain for themselves and for their children. They were all thrilled by the idea that a man of his stature and prominence had become their own personal confidant and close friend. Which is perhaps why, in their intoxicated glow, they accepted the insane shit that he told them next. Brace yourself, because what I'm about to say is a lot to take in.
This is what we're in for, okay? Insane stuff. Okay. We got to be very aware of this. If anybody comes out with insane things, or if you want to tell people insane things, this is what we want. This is the good stuff. So let's hear it.
He told the family about a conspiracy targeting them. He said that he was a member of a secret governmental organization whose mission was to guarantee balance in the world by fighting against all forms of corruption. He told them that he was actually a secret agent sent to protect them from enemies targeting them. According to him, his secret society, an offshoot of the Knights of the Round Table, sought out great and deserving families in order to ensure their survival by protecting them from their enemies. He told them that Freemasons and Rosicrucians were everywhere. He told them to beware of homosexuals and Jews.
This person's crazy.
He said that it was their family's destiny to stand up for good against evil.
Wait, what's wrong with the homosexuals? Okay, we'll let the other group slide through there, but the homosexuals, what did they do? They never done anything to anybody. What the heck?
As their ancestors had done during the reign of Louis XIV in resisting Catholic oppression. He told them that enemies wanted to ruin their family, to destroy them, and to make them disappear because they, the Vidrines, were a living memory of what nobility used to mean, and that they reflected the greatness of what France once was. He told them that their family was one of the chosen few who would help restore France to what it used to be. And guess what? They believed him.
Very flattering. Interesting. Was that part one? Was that it?
That's all you need to know now.
That was so short. Okay, hold on. Part two coming up right now. All right, 14 days. Get out of here with that. Immediately is what we want.
Okay. Aye.
Throughout the time that Thierry Tilly spent with the Vidrines, he shared a lot about himself. However, most of what he shared about his past was just straight up lies. He said that his mother was barely more than a child when she had him at the age of 14, that she would have been a championship figure skater if he hadn't been born. He claimed that his father was a naval frogman who worked in the special services for the Ministry of Defense. He said that at one time he was a semi-pro tennis player, as well as a semi-pro footballer who almost played for Marseille as a goalkeeper. He claimed that he was also a lawyer, a pilot, a professional skier, and that he parachuted from a military plane when he was only 12 years old. He claimed that he was ambidextrous and could play tennis with both hands. He bragged that he could run 1,000 meters in 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Is he just like a compulsive liar? Is this like a mental disorder going on here? What is happening right now? Why is he saying all this stuff? This is crazy. And it seems like a lot of it could be very easily demonstrated to be false, right? Why is he just going on this? And why are they believing it? That's the real part. What are they believing this stuff for? This is nonsense.
He claimed that he knew the former French president, Francois Mitterrand, personally, as well as celebrities such as Brigitte Bardot, Pierre Richard, Sophie Marceau, and Lillian Bettencourt.
But wait, he seems to know a lot of people, though. He seems to have lots of connections, and he's really rich. Is it because he's lying? Does lying actually get you a lot of status? What do you guys think? Could I lie my way to the top of the social ladder? Is that possible? How is this working?
He also said that he was related to the Queen of England. According to him, he was a descendant of the Habsburgs family, which is of Austro-Hungarian nobility, a strange claim to make since the Habsburgs are notorious for their royal inbreeding. His personal account of his schooling was even more convoluted. He said that after he studied law, he received advanced placement into a school specializing in intelligence training for diplomats and soldiers. He claimed that he then gained a PhD in marketing and a specialist degree in the detection of counterfeit money. He said that he had a master's degree in property management and administration, as well as a degree in international economy. Then he claimed that he studied what he described as intelligence concerning codes of investment in relation to corruption. Of course, all of these claims were lies. No records exist.
Everyone, what did he actually do? He must have done something. He is rich, right? What did he do?
Backing up anything he said. When a judge questioned him years later in court, he attempted to confuse the discussion by listing a rapid succession of dates, names, and places. When pressed further, he simply claimed that he could prove it. That he claimed that his records were seized by Scotland Yard due to matters of national security. Okay, so, now that we went through his claims, here's the real story of who Thierry Tilly actually is.
Okay, that's what we want.
Thierry Tilly was born on March 29th, 1964. He was a somewhat frail and sickly child who experienced convulsions, as well as problems with his eyesight, which had to be operated on. He grew up in a modest home. His father was a driver and his mother was a nurse. Although Thierry Tilly was endowed with a remarkable memory and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of historical facts and dates, he was never a gifted student. After high school, he applied for entry into a naval college, but his application was rejected. Thierry Tilly lived with his parents until he was 30.
He sounds like a gamer. He could be you. Oh my
During his
god.
30s, he developed an interest in business. However, all of his ventures failed spectacularly. This was not because Tilly was incompetent, but rather it was because he was a crook. The little that's known about Thierry Tilly's past scams all involve one man, a lawyer named Vincent David. Yes, the very same Vincent David.
It was Vincent all along who introduced him. He's the guy? Their team? Oh my
David, who
goodness.
first introduced Ghislaine to Tilly. The two met during the mid-1980s, and throughout the following years, they remained close friends.
Why don't we have a picture of Vincent? Now, oh, man.
Vincent David recalled in court that, quote, "At first I found him congenial. He asked me to sort out various accounts which it turned out could only be done through their liquidation. Without this, the company concerned would have had to close. I discovered later on that he won people's trust, got them to sign contracts, and then took matters no further. He wanted to dispose of a considerable number of companies whose articles of association remained vague. Initially, Vincent David wanted to help Tilly, so he provided him with legal advice free of charge. Although he wasn't entirely sure what exactly it was that Tilly did for work, he believed that Tilly was brilliant and had a lot of potential. Therefore, it wasn't long before Tilly was able to rope Vincent into a scheme. Tilly claimed to be developing several luxury apartments in the Alps, and he wanted Vincent David to jump on board as an investor and as his legal representation. Tilly said he couldn't pay him, but instead he promised to give him keys to one of his apartment units once construction was done. Tilly also promised Vincent David a large return on his investment. The deal eventually collapsed, and Vincent David found himself stuck with an 18-month bill for unpaid rent of an apartment which Tilly was staying in. Vincent David later said in court that he still trusted Tilly even after that, since he saw him as a young man who was trying to take his first steps into the world of business. Not too long after that, Vincent David introduced Tilly to the heir of a champagne company named Hughes Gosset. Then Tilly defrauded the heir, who for some reason never lodged a complaint. Whether Vincent David knew that Tilly had scammed Hughes Gosset is unknown. Regardless, Vincent David continued to associate with Tilly. Vincent David even let him stay at his home for some time before his wife kicked him out after Tilly had traveled to Nice in order to make a list of property belonging to her family. In court, Vincent David said of his wife, quote, "She realized before I did that his objective was to get his claws into rich people and to live off of their capital. He is brilliant, there's no question about that, but he employs his intellectual faculties in a scandalous manner. He manages to maneuver people into a position of veritable intellectual subjection."
So he tried to get Vincent first, Vincent David, and that person handed him off to Ghislaine. Okay, interesting. So your first client, I guess if you become a con man, one of your clients can refer you to somebody else if it doesn't work out. That's pretty nice to know. And no one's going to tell on you if you defraud a bunch of people, no one says anything? That's really bizarre. I love this.
Last time I talked about how Thierry Tilly slowly won the Vadrines' trust and then told them that they were the targets of a plot. What I left out in that video was that not every member of the family fell for his lies. For example, while the rest of the family trusted Tilly, Ghislaine's husband, Jean Marchand, did not. Jean Marchand, who was a financial journalist for well-known papers in France, was also a highly educated and worldly man. At one point, he was the youngest editor-in-chief of a newspaper in France. In 1997, he launched a magazine, but it ultimately went bankrupt. Jean Marchand first met Tilly at an annual dinner for Ghislaine's school in the year 2000. After they spoke, Ghislaine asked her husband what she thought of him. Foolish was the word he used to describe Thierry Tilly, who had wasted no time before telling him that he was a secret agent. Jean tried to warn his wife that Tilly was a fraud, but his warnings fell on deaf ears. Ghislaine was already under Tilly's spell and was far too gone to be reasoned with. Over the next few months, Jean Marchand continued to have run-ins with Tilly. Jean noticed that Tilly frequently borrowed money from people, but never seemed to pay for his own expenses. He recalled how Tilly told him that his briefcase would explode if someone other than himself ever touched it, a statement which Jean found to be an unbelievably silly bit of fiction. One night, Jean stormed out during the middle of dinner, exasperated by Tilly's boasts and lies. Years later, he told a journalist, quote, "Tilly said he belonged to an extraordinary network, that he knew everyone who was anyone, and he mentioned some kind of very mysterious supranational agency that was above NATO and the UN. He suggested that this thing was all-powerful and he belonged to it, and that therefore, he could do everything he wanted. He was so bizarre that I couldn't take him seriously, and I distrusted him. Because of Jean's distrust, Tilly began to make a habit of regularly demonizing him, telling Ghislaine that he had proof that Jean was cheating on her and was planning to leave their marriage.
Oh, no.
Then he added that he had evidence that Jean was also part of the Judeo-Masonic plot targeting her. Although she was dissatisfied with her marriage to Jean, she still loved him deeply. So Tilly knew he had to gradually chip away at their bond over time, and that he did. It took a little over a year, but she started to believe that her husband, Jean Marchand, was in league with their enemies, and that her parents-in-law were as well. But
Only a year? Only a year for some stranger to come in and turn you against your husband and your family. How awful
Tilly
is
didn't
that?
stop just there. He also claimed that her older sister Anne, who died of a brain tumor in 1997, was instead murdered by her brother-in-law, who was also part of the sect.
What?
Going forward, Tilly continued to play the role of a secret agent, telling Ghislaine that his job at the school was only part of his cover. Over time, he added in more details, such as that there were other agents close by who were working with him. Sometimes he would make a show of nodding at a random passerby, and then claim that they were part of his team, telling her that they were all on the same mission. Whenever an issue would arise for her or the school, Tilly would find a way to blame it on unseen enemies. Tilly warned her that Freemasons wanted to hurt her, her family, and that she must be vigilant, implying that they are everywhere, even within the inner workings of the school. Soon it wasn't only strangers that she had to be wary of, but also her colleagues, family, friends, and even her husband. Tilly explained that part of his mission duties was making McCarthy-esque lists of Jews and Freemasons. Ironically,
And
Tilly
gays.
himself had been a member of the Freemasons before being removed for embezzlement.
So he's legitimately a Freemason. Is he just revengeful? He's just vengeful against the Masons that kicked him out? How ridiculous is this?
Then he started claiming that through his sources, he learned that the school was being eyed by a Masonic group since it was prime real estate. He warned her that in order to acquire it, they would use nefarious and deadly tactics. She became increasingly more paranoid of the enemies which Tilly spoke of. She lost 12 kilos and began to wear thick, dark sunglasses indoors and out. She believed people were following her wherever she went. She warned faculty members to watch out for Freemasons. A staff member at the school told Vanity Fair, quote, "We could not have heat in this school because the fuel tank was empty. When I told Ghislaine that it had to be filled, she replied that the Jews and Freemasons had siphoned it and that it was a Judeo-Masonic plot. At Tilly's behest, Ghislaine renovated the groundskeeper's quarters at the school for him to live in and hired a guard to patrol the premises with a Rottweiler on a leash. She did this because she believed that Tilly needed an inconspicuous location to reside in due to his life as a secret agent. Following that, Tilly convinced Ghislaine to set up surveillance cameras at the school. She did this after he told her that his guard was overwhelmed with having to protect them from Freemasons and Rosicrucians by himself. By mid-2001, the school officially shut down. It was put into liquidation with a heavy liability and was in the process of declaring itself bankrupt. However, Tilly told Ghislaine that the shutdown was only a temporary measure, and Ghislaine herself wasn't very concerned. She genuinely believed that she didn't have to worry because she was under the protection of Tilly's supranational organization, which the French government and courts were subordinate to. Additionally, she believed that Freemasons wanted to kill her family, which she saw as a more pressing concern than her failed school. What strengthened Tilly's claims that they were the target of a plot was that suddenly a string of mishaps began to plague the family. Ghislaine's son Francois was beaten up in the subway. 4 of their cars were stolen in quick succession. Charles Henri's gynecology office was flooded because of a gutter blocked by a blouse. Christine's car randomly caught fire at a toll booth. Then a farm trailer and some seed was stolen from one of their sheds. Tilly told them that the trailer would reappear within a week, and just like he said, it did. Without any intervention on their part,
Was he doing this? Did he set up this? Breaking into 4 cars? Flooding their office? Why would he do this? Did he do this? Did he do this? Or did it just coincidentally happen when he thought that they were going to have lots of troubles? He must have done this, right? This is evil.
Christine's smallholders
is
account
horrible.
was credited with a reimbursement of the cost of the stolen seed. When 2 of their cows died after swallowing barbed wire, even the vet who examined the animals was baffled.
What?
Following that, 2/3 of their estate was threatened by a plan for a reservoir, designed for the irrigation of crops. Tilly promised them that he would stop it from happening. And although the plan had been fiercely contested by the inhabitants throughout the region, Tilly took sole credit for stopping it. Whether many of these misfortunes were manufactured by Tilly himself remains unknown.
Okay.
Soon, Tilly persuaded them to stop paying their taxes. He told them to send the money they owed to the fisc directly to him so he could do so on their behalf. Of course, he never did. Tilly encouraged other members of the family to beef up their security as well. He visited Philippe's home and installed security cameras and reinforced shutters. There he made acquaintance with Philippe's partner Bridget and warned her that her ex-husband was a Freemason and that she was being watched. Bridget fully believed him when he told her that her ex-husband wanted to seize her, lock her up, throw her into a psychiatric hospital, and then empty her bank accounts. Tilly then gave her what he called an encrypted phone, and she transferred 115,000 euros to him for protection. Philippe's partner Bridget became convinced that all strangers were potential kidnappers. She saw random inconsequential things such as seeing a suspicious white car make an abrupt turn, or seeing a man peek over his newspaper while she passed, as a sign that she was being followed. Terrified, she soon became reluctant to even leave her house. By this point, Thierry Tilly had successfully reprogrammed the family into a cult. The paranoia and fear which he instilled in them had changed them from an ordinary group of people into puppets who would do anything he told them to, believing that he was the only one that could keep them safe.
Wow.
Thus what followed was the family successively banishing loved ones from their lives, while further isolating themselves from the rest of the world. One amazing thing about this story is that by March of 2001, Thierry Tilly fled France and moved to England indefinitely in order to escape from a 1-year sentence for fraudulent bankruptcy. Before leaving, he told Ghislaine that he was relocating to England for his mission duties. Incredibly, his influence over the family continued. Going forward, their main form of communication with him was only by phone and email. And as unbelievable as it sounds, he was still able to manipulate them, even though he was in a different country. Such was the case during September of 2001, when Tilly vetted the guest list for 2 back-to-back events that the family were hosting.
Guys, like, just imagine, like, do you have any friends who are this close to you? You've got Terry Tilly over here connecting with a whole family. He's trying his best to meet up with them every single day. And even when he has to flee the country, he still calls and emails all the time. How wholesome is that? Now, forgetting all the extra context along with it. That just sounds really nice. Wouldn't it be nice to connect with people like that? Oh my god.
Ghislaine's daughter's
How cool.
wedding and Ghislaine's yearly music festival. During the wedding between her daughter Guillemette and a young pianist from Nice named Sebastian, certain relatives were shunned and some were even barred from entry. Ghislaine's widowed brother-in-law and his children were included on Tilly's list of those who were prohibited from attending the wedding. Ghislaine even called her brother-in-law herself to inform him that he would not be invited because she had information that he was secretly a Freemason. Ghislaine's husband, Jean Marchand, and his parents also made it onto Tilly's list of potential enemies. Although they still attended Guillemotte's wedding, they were purposely given the cold shoulder by the Vidrines. In his book Diabolique, co-written by Ghislaine, Jean Marchand writes that he felt completely isolated from his family during the wedding, even while walking his own daughter down the aisle. A week later, during Ghislaine's annual music festival, Tilly imposed an even stricter control over the guest list than at the wedding. Tilly told them to treat certain family members with open hostility, and the festival ended disastrously when Charles Henri got into a fistfight with one such family member. Going forward, it didn't matter who Tilly accused of being a Freemason. Old friends, husbands, wives, children. If he said they were one, well then that was that. Case in point, shortly after the music festival, the Vidrines turned on Ghislaine's husband Jean Marchand and ousted him from their lives. Months prior to his removal from the family, Jean Marchand had asked Ghislaine for a technical divorce in order to protect their property. His reasoning was that he wanted to avoid both of them being involved in the inevitable bankruptcy of Ghislaine's school. He also wanted to save their remaining property, but had no intention of leaving Ghislaine. However, due to Tilly's past claims that Jean was a serial cheater who was planning to leave her for another woman and settle in the United States, Ghislaine mistook Jean's request of a technical divorce for a legitimate one, and Tilly used their miscommunication to ramp up his accusations against Jean. Jean Marchand's banishment from the family took place on September 7th of 2001. It all began after Ghislaine found 2 items on her lawn. One was an oddly placed bouquet of flowers, and the other was a single glove. It's a testament to how paranoid they were by this point that finding these innocuous items put both Ghislaine and her brother Philippe into a state of absolute panic. After finding the flowers in the glove, Ghislaine immediately called Tilly in London. As mentioned earlier, Tilly didn't like Jean Marchand, especially since he couldn't control him. Prior to this, he had spent over a year demonizing Jean while speaking to Ghislaine and the rest of the family. Hence, he used the situation to spin an elaborate story so he could finally get rid of Jean Marchand. On the phone, Tilly told Ghislaine, quote, "These are the evil signs of the network to which Jean belongs. The glove means that they're going to cut off your hand, and the bouquet of flowers means that you are near death.
Jesus.
So listen to me. You'll pick them up and put them in a bag, and then you'll throw them at Jean's feet after doing exactly what I tell you." After finishing what Tilly told her to do, she stopped at Philippe's house where she dropped off her bags. Then they waited for their brother Charles-Henri to arrive. Tilly insisted that she be accompanied by her two brothers because they were all going to confront her husband Jean together. Then Tilly sent her an email detailing exactly what she had to say to Jean and even the time when to do so, 3:30 p.m. At 3:30 p.m. on the dot, the trio drove back to Ghislaine's house. There they found Jean Marchand. Following the instructions that Tilly had emailed to her, Ghislaine threw the glove and the bouquet of flowers at her husband's feet. Then she recited the following. "Jean, here are the evil signs of your network that I have found in our garden in Fontenay. You have half an hour to pack up and leave this house. I know that you are part of a sect and have over 40 mistresses. Go back without turning around and reassure yourself. Uninitiated and weak beings like me, who have no soul and who are just good at being objects, can also have no regrets nor remorse because it's always life that prevails against the non-life of the initiates." Afterward, Jean attempted to reason with her.
What?
Assure yourself. Uninitiated and weak beings like me, who have no soul and who are just good at being objects, can also have no regrets nor remorse because it's always life that prevails against the non-life of the initiates.
Go back without turning around and reassure yourself. Uninitiated weak beings like me, who have no soul, are just good at being objects. Jesus. And have no regrets nor remorse because it is always life that prevails against the non-life of the initiate. What does that mean? And is she calling herself uninitiated? Seems like that. And weak? Yes, seems like that. And a person with no soul and just an object? Why would she want to call herself that? And how is that a I don't understand anything that's happening at this moment. But I can see how that could be very confusing for Jean. And this I mean, what the heck did he do? Did he just turn around and reassure himself with this? He thinks that she's gone crazy, I suppose.
Afterward, Jean attempted to reason with her,
No,
but
he
to no
reasons.
avail. Then, suddenly, a physical altercation occurred. Then Ghislaine's brothers, Charles-Henri and Philippe, clumsily grabbed at Jean's clothes and started dragging him to the door. After a great deal of struggle, Jean told them that he understood and that he would leave by himself. Following that, he packed his things and walked out the door. Soon, Jean learned that his joint account with Ghislaine had been emptied. A banker told him that a week earlier, Ghislaine had transferred their money and savings to a bank called National Westminster. She had left him penniless and in severe debt once his taxes came in. Following that, he was only able to get by due to a 10-month payment plan he had arranged with his bank, and also with the help of his parents and friends. Months after he was banished from the family, Jean left them a voicemail message which made Tilly's claims that he was part of a sect more believable. The message he left went, quote, "You, the family Vidrines, vermin that you are, we are going to see to you. You're on your own, you're isolated, and you're already done for. The bailiffs will soon be there. You're finished." Jean's use of the word "we" only reinforced
Why
the
did he-
theory that he was part of a plot against them.
Why did he say
Going
that?
forward, Jean would be cut off from his children.
Why did Jean do that? Wait a second, is Jean a part of a sect? Some secret society? What the heck what is this whole vermin that you are? You are isolated. Why would he say this? The bailiff is, why is he saying these words? He's being so weird. Jean, what is going on? And why is he reinforcing the stereotype of a person who is in a weird secret society against a family?
His wife, and much of her family for the next 8 years. Even when his mother died of mesenteric ischemia only a month later, all of Jean's phone calls were ignored by his estranged family. Moreover, none of them attended his mother's funeral, not even his children or his wife.
Dang.
Although Ghislaine writes that she loved her mother deeply and was very close to her, Tilly implored her not to attend the funeral because he claimed to have information that it was a trap to take her to a mental hospital. 48 hours after their confrontation with Jean, Tilly instructed Philippe, Bridget, and Ghislaine to sequester themselves inside of her school, which by then had been shut down and abandoned. Tilly told them that since they were no longer paying any rent, they must occupy the building until he aided them in reopening it. Thinking that they would only stay there for a few days and that Tilly was working on a life-saving plan for the school, they squatted there. However, Ghislaine Philippe and his partner Bridget ended up staying in the school for the next 4 months. Tilly was the only person they spoke to during this period. He called them a dozen times per day with updates and orders. He ensured them that he had agents on the ground, ready to neutralize any approaching enemy, but he added that they must take extra precautions to stay safe.
Legit, he called them 12 times a day, did he say? Dozens of times a day for 4 months? Good Lord. Is there anybody who you're that close with?
Tilly only allowed the trio to go out on rare occasions. They lived on a shoestring budget without basics like heat, electricity, and hot water. By December, the repo men arrived. They seized any assets from Ghislaine's school which could be sold to sponge off the debt accumulated from unpaid rent. Once again, Ghislaine was unfazed by this because Tilly insisted that he had everything under control. On the 15th of December, Tilly warned her that Jean's network of enemies was converging in on her and that they had to leave the school immediately. He told them that Jean had hired assassins to kill them. He added that these assassins were Asian. Terrified, they evacuated the school
What do
and
Asians
sped
do?
away in Philippe's car. At about 60 kilometers away from
What the heck? He's got something against the Freemasons, the Jews, the homosexuals, and the Asians now? Why are we bringing so many people into this? Who's on your side?
Paris, Tilly called and told Ghislaine that Jean had attached an explosive device to Philippe's Mercedes, and that it would explode at any minute. He then ordered them to stay calm and abandon the car as soon as possible. In a hurry, they took a train to Montflancan, feeling as though they were refugees after their months of seclusion, and with the power of Jean's network becoming even more threatening.
That's all you need to know now.
Okay, part 3.
Okay. Ay.
There's an important person in this story who I've yet to mention, and that's a former car salesman named Jacques Gonzalez. Jacques Gonzalez was
Jacques.
first introduced to the Vidrines as Tilly's boss, and as the president of a secret organization which helped protect aristocratic families from Judeo-Masonic plots targeting them.
Okay, is Jacques in it too? Is he in on the plan with Tilly?
The Vidrines never knew much more than vague tidbits about Jacques Gonzalez. According to Philippe, he was the cousin of the Spanish king Juan Carlos, and led a very discreet existence in Paris. Other family members said that he was the leader of a global network of secretive grandees and held more power than the presidents of France, Russia, and the United States. Whenever Tilly spoke to him on the phone, he would do so with hushed tones and would quickly move to another room to take the call in private. One day, Jacques Gonzalez visited Ghislaine's school. The halls were cleared, and no one was permitted to get a good look at him. Only one teacher saw what she described as a short man wearing a hat and moving quickly down the hall. Jacques Gonzalez was also said to be the head of a charity based in Quebec called the Blue Light Foundation, which purportedly funded various philanthropic endeavors such as the building of hospitals in China, bulk purchases of alfalfa intended to alleviate famine, and open cast coal mining. Jacques Gonzalez is a strange part of this story, and that's because, for some unknown reason, Tilly shared a great deal of the money he stole from the Vidrines with him. Interestingly enough, while Gonzalez's phone was wiretapped by authorities, he was recorded telling his girlfriend that he thought Tilly was either ill or totally mad. In court, Tilly alleged that Gonzalez was the puppet master of the whole affair. He claimed that he was manipulated by Gonzalez into defrauding the Vidrines. He also claimed that the family had sought him out first, seeking his advice for tax evasion.
Oh, it's an interesting plan to have, well, presumably if Tilly is the mastermind here, to have like another random person who you give money to make it seem like he is the actual leader. And that's an interesting way of going about it. Though, I don't know if that's actually what's happening here. Maybe our friend Jacques is the actual leader, or maybe Jacques and Tilly are working together. I'm not exactly sure what is actually happening. But that's a cool idea, to have a con man just give charity to some random person as a way to actually think to put the blame onto them if they ever get caught.
Gonzalez claimed that he had no knowledge of what was happening, and that he simply believed that the Vidrines were a generous family who were happy to donate their money to the Blue Light Foundation. He said in court, quote, "If I had known what Thierry was doing, I would have never gone along with it." Although he insisted that he was innocent of any wrongdoing, there exist tapes from a wiretap operation of him pressuring Tilly to send him money. In court, a transcript of the phone call was read out loud, and he was quoted as saying, "I've had it up to here with these people. They must cough up the cash. If not, things will turn nasty. Execution." Regardless,
Whoa.
he continued to claim that he was innocent. arguing in court that the phone call in no way proved his complicity, and that he simply became worked up while pressuring Tilly to hand over the money he promised to the Blue Light Foundation. Additionally, he said that since all of the money he received had been sent by Tilly, he wasn't responsible for the manner in which it was acquired. Either way, there's no doubt of Gonzalez's involvement in Tilly's defrauding of the Vidrines, although what remains unclear is exactly why Gonzalez's involvement was needed or beneficial to Tilly at all. Whenever Thierry Tilly sensed potential dissent from one of the Vidrines, his go-to strategy was to divide and conquer. He did so by demonizing an individual, and then encouraging the more convicted members of the family to oust them from the group. By this point in the story, he had already accomplished this with Jean Marchand, and he would go on to do the same with Jean and Ghislaine's son-in-law, Sebastian, who had married into the family only a few months prior. The last remaining connection Jean had to his family was with his son-in-law, Sebastian. Sebastian still called Jean from time to time, and even wanted to attend his mother's funeral, but was discouraged from doing so by the rest of the family. After their honeymoon, Sebastian and Guillemette lived happily in Nice for some months, but by late December of 2001, their marriage was ready to collapse due to the manipulations of Thierry Tilly.
Oh no.
Sebastian told Jean that Guillemette had changed since they returned from their honeymoon. She suddenly became prone to anxiety attacks. She spent most of her time corresponding with her mother on the phone or via email. In an interview, Sebastian said, quote, "Guillemette explained to me that we had to pay attention to what we said on the phone, because it was tapped. She kept telling me that her father, Jean Marchand, was a dangerous man. One evening after returning from a movie, they had a fight and Guillemette ran off. Later, Sebastian found her huddled inside of a telephone booth, terrified and clutching the phone while speaking to her mother, Ghislaine. One day, Guillemette traveled to Montflancan and never returned to Nice. When Sebastian called and asked her when she'd be back, she told him that no one in her family could drive her to the station because all of their cars had been rigged with explosive devices. Before he could find out more, she hung up. He kept trying to call back, but she never answered." Just like with John, Tilly began to make up stories about Sebastian, claiming that his team of covert agents had spotted him frequenting prostitutes. These same lies were then fed to Guillemette, who, trusting her mother and Tilly, fell for them completely. Tilly also convinced them that Sebastian was a murderer who was a part of John's network of killers. Sometime later, Ghislaine, her nephew Guillaume, and her daughter Guillemette traveled to Nice and visited Sebastian in order to confront him. Tilly instructed the trio to see if they can reconcile Guillemette and Sebastian's marriage, despite, quote, his sexual deviance and his membership in John's sect. Tilly also warned them not to eat or drink anything offered by Sebastian, as it might be poisoned. When they knocked on his apartment door, Sebastian refused to let anyone other than Guillemette in. Once Guillemette entered the apartment, the two newlyweds quickly engaged in a frantic argument. Then, without thought, Sebastian equipped himself with a large kitchen knife and headed towards the door where the others stood behind. Eventually, he put the knife away, but not before brandishing it in front of Ghislaine and Guillaume. Although the knife was meant as nothing more than an empty threat, they all had no doubt that Sebastian actually intended to kill them. Once things settled down, they all went to a nearby cafe to talk. They tried to warn Sebastian that he was in danger by associating with Jean Marchand, and that the men in Jean's sect would double-cross him. To this, Sebastian reacted with quiet bafflement. Everything they said sounded insane to him. He realized that there was nothing he could say that would make them wake up from their collective madness. From January 1st of 2002 until August 2003, Ghislaine, Guillemette, Christine, Philippe, Bridget, and the family's 88-year-old grandmother, also named Guillemette, spent much of their time sequestered in their summer home, Chateau Martel. During this time, Tilly and Ghislaine exchanged emails and phone calls every day. He ordered them not to communicate with the outside world, not to answer the telephone, not to let anyone in, and not to read their mail. Outsiders, such as domestic helpers, were let go. Tilly claimed that his teams were in the woods watching Martel day and night, protecting them, and that it was the safest place for them to be. He claimed that their enemies had been spotted in the woods planting listening devices around their premises. Therefore, they all had to lay low. Once or twice a month, Ghislaine would go out to do their shopping, as she was the only one who was permitted to leave the house. Whenever she left, she did so with the overwhelming fear that she would be murdered by Jean's sect. However, Tilly assured her that his agents were always watching and that she was safe. Whenever she returned home, she was required to make an oral report to Tilly, detailing what she bought and if she saw anything or anyone suspicious while she was out. Inside Chateau Martel, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone in the house was paranoid and erratic. Tilly's orders by email and phone kept the Vidrines on constant edge. Tilly requested that they each keep a diary to record everything that happened inside of the house. He ordered them to take notes about everyday activities, the state of the relationships, and any curious or exceptional incidents which they observed. In her book, Christine describes Tilly's daily orders as a form of harassment. Quote,
I wonder what is Tilly getting at it from this point? At this point, what the heck is Tilly getting out of any of this interaction with these folks? And he's doing it for very long periods of time. He seems to have squeezed a lot out of them already. What more does he need? What more can he even get?
one day we are obliged to close all shutters and live by electric light. Several days go by. Ghislaine gets an email. The state of emergency is lifted. We may reopen the shutters, but not go out into the garden. Besides the closed shutter alerts, he told us to do various more or less pointless things, such as washing the walls and floors thoroughly, cleaning out the cupboards, dusting the pictures. When the halt of tires reached the house, it would put the family into a veritable frenzy, obsessing over the potential danger and eyeing the cameras with intense fears, and of course, calling Tilly immediately. Otherwise, they passed their time with hobbies. Philippe played computer games such as Age of Empires 2, Bridget devoted herself to endless knitting, Christine read books, Ghislaine sat in the salon with her elderly mother, who kept busy by embroidering a tablecloth for Tilly. One day, Ghislaine's elderly mother, Guillemette, started to complain that she was experiencing blurred vision. She was developing cataracts, but Tilly convinced them that it was instead caused by their enemies, directing laser beams through their windows in order to unnerve them. All of them believed him except for Christine, who wasn't as convicted as the rest. But even her husband, Charles Henri, who's a doctor, believed Tilly's theory about the laser beams. As a result, his mother never saw a doctor to treat her cataracts. It wasn't long before neighbors began to notice that the Vidrines, who at one time enjoyed a positive reputation in the community, suddenly locked themselves up inside of their summer home. Some worried neighbors left food for the family, but such offerings were quickly discarded. Tilly warned them that his agents, stationed in the woods, had proof that the food was poisoned and that their neighbors were trying to assassinate them. Tilly contacted them multiple times a day, requesting for money to be sent. This was all done under the guise that they were helping to finance the fight against their enemies. Charles Henri, who owned a gynecology and obstetrician practice, regularly sent urgent credit transfers to Tilly under various headings such as day-to-day money for the children, insurance, business investment. As for the sums involved, they all varied between 2,000 and 10,000 euros, sometimes even more.
Okay.
Whenever Tilly asked,
amount.
Charles Henri would leave work, even if the waiting room was full, and visit his bank in order to perform the transaction himself. The sole breadwinner of the 11, Charles Henri continued to work, even while the rest of his family were sequestered in Martel. However, in less than a year, he would also join them in their isolation. Soon, Charles Henri's medical practice began to fail, so Tilly told him to ask his wife Christine to sign documents agreeing to sell all of her financial assets in order to help save the clinic. Everyone in the family transferred money to Tilly. He had all of their bank account passwords and would check to see if they were hiding money from him. By 2003, Charles Henri's gynecology practice shut down. This transpired after Tilly suggested that Charles Henri undertake an internal audit of his practice. It was the lawyer Vincent David who performed the audit on behalf of Tilly's company, Presswell Limited. Charles Henri, being in charge of the management of his practice, proposed the audit to his partner, who agreed to go ahead with it. However, things became contentious after Charles Henri's partner was presented with a scant 2-page report and a steep bill of 90,000 francs, 70,000 of which represented the lawyer Vincent David's fee. Later, it was made clear that Tilly owed money to Vincent David, stemming back to a botched real estate deal, and was trying to pay him back. Charles Henri told his partner that the audit and its large fee were necessary, but his partner wouldn't buy it. Then his partner had the audit examined by an accountant and a lawyer, and following that, he issued 15 legal proceedings, several of them against Charles Henri. His scheme thwarted, Tilly conjured up another conspiracy theory to feed Charles Henri. He told him that Jean Rachan's sect of Freemasons, Jews, homosexuals, and Asian assassins were preparing files on his past medical errors in order to have him incarcerated for malpractice. Even worse, his former partner was also a part of Jean's sect. Tilly claimed that his agents on the ground had information that Charles Henri would be arrested by the next day. Therefore, he must liquidate everything and disappear. However far-fetched it may sound, Charles Henri believed Tilly. After entrusting his patients with 2 colleagues who he respected, he fled to Bordeaux for safe haven. Given only a few hours, he drove at breakneck speed, believing that he was being tailed by armed Asian assassins. Similar to how Tilly persuaded Ghislaine that the collapse of her school was only temporary, he promised Charles Henri that all was not lost. He explained that the Blue Light Foundation, headed by his boss, Jack Gonzalez, was planning to build hospitals abroad and that he would be guaranteed a major role. Charles Henri was sold. Later, Tilly convinced Charles Henri to sell his property in Bordeaux since the proceeds gained from the liquidation of his medical practice wasn't enough to shake off their enemies. Charles Henri's wife Christine was hesitant, so Tilly accused her of preferring her property over the lives and safety of her children. For speaking out, Tilly convinced the others that she was hysterical and had her prescribed to Transine. Sometime later, they sold their house in Bordeaux, as well as their beach apartment. They set aside 200,000 euros from the sale of their property in order to pay their taxes, but Christine later learned that 150,000 euros of that money was pocketed by Tilly. Moreover, Tilly had their possessions from the sale dispatched to London, where he sold everything without their knowledge. He continued to do this whenever they sold one of their properties. By June 15th of 2003, Tilly told them to leave Chateau Martel and relocate to Philippe's house, which was only a short distance away. Tilly told them to stay there for 5 days, but in fact, they never returned to Martel again. The reason for their sudden relocation was because Tilly knew that the Fisc, France's equivalent to the IRS, would inevitably send bailiffs to Martel since the family had not paid any taxes in 3 years. Soon the bailiffs and moving trucks arrived. A private detective investigating the family was able to discreetly film what transpired on that day. In the footage, the family could be seen desperately trying to intervene but failing to stop the bailiffs. Everything that could be auctioned off in order to pay off their debt was seized. Furniture, dishes, trinkets, books, and even items that didn't belong to the defaulting taxpayers, Charles Henri and Christine. Distraught, they immediately called Tilly in London. Tilly calmly explained that everything was going according to plan. He told them that it was all part of a ruse to make them seem vulnerable in the eyes of their enemies in order to bait them into an attack so that his agents on the ground could better neutralize them.
Wow.
A year later, Jean Marchand attended the auction of their belongings. With the help of a friendly auctioneer, he was able to secure some of their furniture, such as a Louis XIV wardrobe, a country sideboard, and a pair of Voltaire armchairs. Time kept passing for Jean without any results. Days turned into weeks, months into years. Any action he took to try and help his family failed. His complaints went unanswered. His letters to the public prosecutor were ignored. Jean Marchand requested legal guardianship for Ghislaine and her elderly mother Guillemette, arguing that they were both mentally unfit. But this failed after a psychologist spoke to them and said that they were fine. Disillusioned with the passivity of the legal system, Jean turned to the press. Since he was at one time the editor-in-chief of one of France's leading newspapers, he had many contacts at his disposal. Thus, he began a media campaign telling his story to France's leading journalists. He was met with skepticism from some journalists who launched their own investigation into the story. One such journalist named Dominique Lage visited Philippe's home where he encountered a very hostile Ghislaine who slammed the door in his face. After that, Dominique Lage wrote his article, but due to French privacy laws, he was not allowed to publish Tilly's full name. Instead, he only wrote Thierry T. The Vidrines later sued the newspaper, calling the article an intolerable interference in their private lives. As a result, the journalist was charged with an invasion of privacy and was required to pay the Vidrines 23,000 euros. The money, of course, went straight to Thierry Tilly.
Wow. Is this why we need freedom of speech in America? Good Lord.
On September 25th of 2003, a few visiting policemen brought the article to the family's attention and made slightly antagonistic comments. Although the article mentioned that Tilly was a known fraud, the family laughed at what they saw as the naivety of journalists, as they believed his criminal charges were just a part of his cover. In her book Diabolique, Ghislaine writes, "It seemed downright comical to us. For the first time in a long time we laughed, even to the point of choking ourselves. It is because we knew that all of these convictions were artificially constructed in high places to serve as his cover." Meanwhile, Ghislaine's husband, Jean Marchand, was doing everything he could to try and save them. Despite his many attempts, Jean didn't receive much help from the police, but they were sympathetic to his cause. The police station in Montflancan filed a number of reports themselves and visited the family frequently for welfare checks. However, the police told him that there was nothing that could legally be done to stop adults from sequestering themselves inside of their own home. Although the Vidrines successfully sued the reporter Dominique Lage, Jean Marchand was able to attract the attention of other newspapers. The media was hooked on the story, which they dubbed The Recluses of Montflancan. As a result, Jean appeared on several major television news programs such as TF1, France 2, France 3, and Canal+. A short documentary was made in which he, along with Sebastian, spoke about how Tilly ruined their marriages and their lives.
Plus jamais de nouvelles.
À l'heure actuelle, je ne sais pas ce qu'elle a à me reprocher. C'est-à-dire que elle serait partie pour un autre homme, elle m'aurait dit écoute, j'aime quelqu'un d'autre. Elle serait partie à l'étranger en me disant je préfère vivre complètement au soleil. Alors on était quand même à Nice, enfin dans un autre monde.
Vous avez jamais rien dit.
Non, absolument pas. Je n'ai aucune raison rationnelle pour savoir pourquoi elle est partie. Et le jour où j'ai commencé à aller mieux, sur un plan psychologique, parce que c'est vrai qu'un choc comme ça, un drame pareil, ça vous met un petit peu sans dessus dessous. Et le jour où j'ai commencé à aller mieux, c'est le jour où je me suis dit, ça sert à rien d'essayer de comprendre leur fonctionnement, parce que c'est irrationnel.
Parce que moi, ce que les gendarmes me disent, c'est ça, c'est ce qu'on vous dit. En fait, allez les voir, ils sont pas si mal que ça, ils sont très bien, c'est un choix.
Non, ça c'est faux.
Alors moi ce que je vous répondrai, allez les voir, et vous verrez. Allez les voir.
Meilleure réponse.
Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un?
Bonsoir, monsieur. Bonsoir. On peut rentrer? On peut rentrer? Est-ce que vous voudriez bien nous parler?
Certaines affaires sont en cours d'instruction. Donc, si vous avez besoin de renseignements, vous vous rapprochez de notre avocat.
D'accord.
Voilà.
Alors, je voudrais d'abord vous dire une
C'est
seule
tout,
chose.
c'est tout, c'est tout.
Wow. Man, this is okay. What do I think about this story? This is a horrible story. Everything is bad here. Everything is wrong. Tilly, I don't know what he discovered and how he discovered it, but he stumbled upon a really not healthy family, I suppose, and he made it much, 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 much less healthy than it already was, and completely destroyed it. This is awful. This is awful. So Tilly and his friend Vincent, I don't understand how Vincent isn't in on the scheme. I don't know how Jacques is related to any of this stuff. I don't know how Ghislaine at all. How did she get trapped up into any of this stuff? But, you know, being friends for 3 years, I guess is good enough to start to trick Ghislaine. But then how did Ghislaine trick her mom? Gillette, and then her daughter, also Gillette, and then Gillian, and all these other folks, and Sebastian, and Philippe, and Charles. How? Why is Charles sending money? He's working. It doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. What conclusions do I draw at that point? Well, I guess people are. I don't know what conclusions to draw here. It just seems this is awful. It's the only conclusion I have so far. This is awful. It sucks to see Jean pushed out of his own family, and his mom dies, and no sympathy at all. He can't see his kids anymore. That's awful. There's a couple other people pushed out. I don't remember. I think it was Sebastian who was pushed out. It kind of sucks. You know, he said earlier that there was a lot of people and it would be confusing. And I think I remember most of the people, but it actually is a lot of people. There's a lot of people here. Let me try to refresh, see if we get all the names. Let's take a look at this family tree again. Okay. Guillemette, that's the mummy. Elaine, this is our main lady who just got tricked immediately. Jean, pushed out of the family already. Brigitte, I forgot about Brigitte and Christine. Okay. Who the heck is this guy? I don't remember this guy at all. Or this lady. Who's this gal? Okay. Or this guy. Francis. And Guillemette. Okay. Interesting. We pushed Jean out. Charles is still paying for folks for some reason. Philippe, I think he's been pushed out too. Where's Sebastian at? I don't see Sebastian on the list. Anyway, okay, a lot of people here, and man, it seems pretty awful. Am I gonna draw something positive out of this later? I don't know. I don't know if I can. The positive thing is it is I mean, how nice is it to be connected with somebody like Tilly? Seems to be a good friend here. Besides the whole, cheating and stealing part. He's keeping up with them very well, keeping in contact with them very well, which seems to be very nice. Maybe we can learn some tips from the con artists, how to connect with people.
Okay. Aye.
Before we get started with part 4, let's quickly go over the Vadrines family tree.
I like this. Wow, I just did this and he's doing it too. Wow. Okay, refresher on the family tree. Wow. Okay, let's get this.
And then a timeline of events thus far.
Okay.
At the top, we have the matriarch, Guillemette de Vadrine.
Guillemette.
Her 3 children are Charles-Henri de Vadrine, who's married to Christine de Vadrine, Ghislaine de Vadrine, who's married to Jean Marchand, Philippe de Vadrine, whose partner is Brigitte Martine. The children of Charles-Henri and Christine are Guillaume, Amory, and Diane.
He doesn't connect because he is nice. He connects because they're his supply. Yes, I understand that. However, what I'm saying is we can take the pattern that he is connecting with them, the way that he is connecting with them, and apply that to our own daily lives, to other people who we want to connect with because we are nice. Not to necessarily praise him for connecting in the way that he's connecting, but to take the skill that he's using to connect with people and utilize it in better circumstances, at least. We can try, at least, potentially.
The children of Ghislaine and Jean Marchand are Francois and Guillemette. Guillemette was married to Sebastian in September of 2001, but divorced him only 4 months later, in January of 2002.
Sebastian's out.
Okay, now here's a quick recap of what's been covered thus far. In 1997, Tilly met Ghislaine. He spent 3 years ingratiating himself with her before she introduced him to the rest of the family in August of 2000. From 2000 until 2001, he proved himself to the family by helping them with their problems and became something like their personal savior. From 2001 until 2003, under his influence, they became afraid to leave their house. He destroyed their businesses, marriages, and lives. He managed to do this even though he left France and moved to England in 2001 in order to escape charges for fraudulent bankruptcy. Once in England, he continued to manipulate the family by phone and email. Links to the family tree and the timeline of events can be found in the description box below. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started with part 4. By this stage in the story, 2003 was coming to a close. By the end of 2003, all of their children were separated from them by Tilly. Francois and Amory were sent to Oxford, under the guise that it was for their studies, and Diane was enrolled into a boarding school. Instead of continuing their education, Francois and Amory were left stationed in a 2-room apartment for months with nothing to do. Money was sent to pay for Francois and Amory's tuition, but Tilly pocketed all of it. When Tilly visited the boys, he gaslighted them into believing that their parents had abandoned them. He said that their parents never called because they didn't love them anymore, and that they were even capable of poisoning them. Being a skilled manipulator, Tilly knew he had to keep them occupied as to not give them time to discuss and critically think. Therefore, he made up nonsense for them to do. Tilly told them to watch a building which he said the Blue Light Foundation planned to make into its headquarters. Every day from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m., they sat in a cafe, surveying the building and taking notes of any suspicious activity. Tilly also assigned them the task of buying cell phones of specific make, model, and color for Jacques Gonzalez. After Gonzalez was arrested in 2009, police found the very same collection of cell phones stashed away in his home, many of them still in their packaging.
Is Jacques in it?
One day, Francois' sister, Guillemette, joined the boys in England. They all lived in a crowded apartment without much to do, so things quickly became contentious. The apartment didn't have any heating or hot water, and they were all penniless. As a result, the relationships began to deteriorate,
and Omri asked Tilly to let him move out and live alone, away from his two cousins, Francois and Guillemette. Eventually, Tilly moved Omri into an office which he claimed belonged to the Blue Light Foundation, with the conditions that no one could know that he lived there, and that he must undergo some self-examination in order to reflect on why he was unable to get along with his cousins. The office, of course, did not belong to Tilly, so Omri squatted there illegally. He slept in a sleeping bag and washed himself with cold water from a sink. His cousins would visit to bring him one meal a day. For 9 months, Omri never left the office. Tilly gave him some books as well as a notepad for him to record his thoughts and the progress of his self-examination, which Tilly called a necessary exercise if he was to succeed in becoming himself. Tilly told Omri that he would share the notebook with a psychologist to help him. One morning, a bailiff knocked on the door and told Omri that he was trespassing. He informed him that the rent for the office hadn't been paid in months. Afterwards, Omri moved back in with his cousins who, under the influence of Tilly, berated him for losing a perfectly good apartment through sheer stupidity. After moving back in with his cousins, Francois and Guillemette, he was forbidden from entering the apartment any further than the entrance hall. Later, Tilly ordered Omri, Francois, and Guillemette to take jobs in England at places like Zara and Burger King. Additionally, in order to fund the fight against their enemies, they gave 90% of their earnings to him. Meanwhile, the adults in the family almost never left Philippe's house, and for 18 months they weren't allowed to see their children. They were only told about them indirectly while sending money, but most often any news they heard would be about how Tilly's men had successfully thwarted another attempt on their children's lives. By August 2006, Christine and Charles Henri were invited to Oxford by Tilly to discuss the progress of their investments. Although he told them that they would stay there for only 3 or 4 days, their stay instead lasted until 2009. Before their journey to England, Christine sifted through the state of their finances and calculated that by that point, they had lost around 4.5 million euros since entrusting their finances to Tilly. It had been 6 years since Christine had first met Thierry Tilly, but she felt as though she hardly knew the man. Before traveling to England, she had only seen him 3 times, spoke to him once on the telephone, and a few times via email. When she and her husband Charles Henri met him in Oxford, he set them up in a dilapidated little house opposite of his. It was still undergoing renovations, and electrical wires hung from the ceiling. Several of its rooms were barely habitable, and the kitchen was unfinished. Tilly apologized several times for his lackluster accommodation, but promised them that once the house was finished, it would belong to their son Guillaume. In her book, Christine writes, quote, "Tilly spends most of his time up in the attic, in his office, except when he disappears for the whole afternoon. He has long discussions with Charles Henri, who becomes evasive when I ask him what they talk about." After 2 weeks in England, Christine finally broached the topic of money with Tilly. Tilly then took her aside and sat her down to tell her about his plan. He explained to her that somewhere locked inside of her was knowledge of a secret hidden treasure. He told her, like Charles Henri, she was a descendant of a very old family. He said that there were ancient families in France who were the chosen guardians of treasure, entrusted to them over the centuries by kings, so that they may come to the aid of the most impoverished and guarantee equilibrium. He then said that these families passed on the secret from generation to generation. The secret he was referring to was called the transmission. He said that her family possessed considerable hidden riches, which she had knowledge of locked away inside of her memory, but the location of the treasure and how to retrieve it needed to be unlocked. Christine, he said, must find the treasure, which consisted of gold and jewels. After hearing this, Christine reacted logically, calling his story absurd. Unlike most members of the family, Christine says that she had many doubts about Thierry Tilly from the get-go, but she claims that she went along with his orders out of fear of being alienated by the rest of the family. Tilly continued his story, telling her that he knew for a fact that the transmission was real because his boss, Jacques Gonzalez, witnessed it. He added that the immense burden of the transmission was too heavy for her and that she must have lost all memory of it. According to him, this sometimes happened, and his boss had already seen several cases like it. He explained that the more serious the matter, the more easily it slips the mind. Throughout the following days, Charles Henri begged his wife Christine to do all that she could to unlock the transmission and to save the family. When she argued that she had no memory of it, Charles Henri became annoyed. One day, Tilly sent Charles Henri and Guillaume to deliver laptops to Jacques Gonzalez. They drove to a cafe where they met with a tall, thin man named Pascal the Great. Then they gave Pascal the keys to their car with the laptop still inside, and waited several hours before he reappeared and returned the car to them before leaving once again.
Upon their return to Oxford, Tilly instructed Charles Henry to tell Christine that during his trip to England, he saw proof that the transmission was real and that the hidden treasure exists. And Charles Henry did just that. Charles Henry told Christine that he visited the offices of the Blue Light Foundation and was shown reliable documents which proved beyond any doubt that the transmission and the treasure were both real. Meanwhile, Tilly continued to question Christine, explaining that he believed the whereabouts of the treasure was locked somewhere inside of her subconscious. After several days of interrogation, Christine told him that she once attended a ball in which young girls were formally introduced into Belgian high society. For some reason, Tilly latched onto this anecdote and used it to conclude that it meant that the treasure was somewhere in Belgium. In no time, he sent Christine, escorted by her son Guillaume, to Belgium and instructed.
What does that even mean, though? Young girls are introduced to Belgium high society. It sounds a bit, it sounds a bit weird. What does that mean exactly? I guess we're not going to get into it, but that sounds a little strange.
Them to visit banks to see if Christine had accounts in any of them. Over the course of a week, Christine and Guillaume went from bank to bank and were repeatedly told by confused tellers that there were no accounts or safety deposit boxes under her name. Although the futility of this quest must have been clear to her, Christine felt as though she had failed her family. When she and her son returned to England, she broke down and said to Tilly, quote, "Thierry, am I still one of the 11? I don't want to be thought of as a traitor. I've done nothing wrong." Later, her worries were justified. Her family began to treat her badly, believing that she was withholding the location of the treasure out of greed. Her husband, Charles Henry, felt as though she was betraying the family and putting their children's lives at risk. Tilly screamed at her, blaming her for impoverishing them all by refusing to say where the treasure was.
Wow.
After that, her imprisonment began. Tilly said it would last until she could reveal the location of the transmission. Tilly confiscated her ID, watch, engagement ring, and necklace, claiming that they were all bugged, an explanation meant to conceal his real intention to pawn them. Although Tilly must have known that the transmission did not exist, he reacted with explosive anger whenever Christine failed to tell him where it was. Years later, when the family wasn't under his influence anymore, they speculated that his whole talk of the transmission and the hidden treasure had just been a ploy to see if they were hiding money from him in other accounts. Eventually, Tilly ordered Christine to exhaustively rewrite a list of phrases meant to jog her memory and persuade her of the consequences of failing to do so. She spent several days rewriting lines such as, "I want to, therefore I can. I know what I must do. Act, otherwise danger. A transmission has taken place within my family. Traces of it remain in my memory. I must and I can recover them. This is possible. This transmission represents an astonishing opportunity for us all. It is all very
Positive
easy.
thinking.
It is within my reach. I must reflect, look myself in the face, have complete confidence in myself, show humility, begin at once. I am capable of this. Concentrate on the desired goal. Do not lie to myself. If I do not do this, I endanger the lives of Guillaume, Amory, and Diane. I will be a bad mother. I must be able to look myself in the face." After months of imprisonment, Christine tried to escape, but she only made it as far as the street before Tilly spotted her on one of his surveillance cameras and brought her back inside by telling her that she was putting her children's lives in danger. In 2007, she was finally let out of the room, but her imprisonment was not over. What she didn't know was that it would resume in the following year, and that her own family members would become her torturers. By January of 2008, Christine was escorted into Tilly's home and was surprised to find that most of her family members, many of whom she hadn't heard from since 2006, were all there waiting for her. After reuniting the family, Tilly sat them down for a lengthy discussion. According to him, one of them knew the location of the transmission, but was hiding it. He told them that until they could find out who it was, they were not permitted to eat, sleep, or leave the room. Moments later, Tilly went downstairs and returned to tell them that he had intercepted an assassin and had successfully neutralized the threat. Tilly claimed that as he went by the kitchen, he bumped into an armed hitman who had broken into the house and was there to slaughter them. Tilly told them that by using his close combat skills, he took out the assassin immediately. His proof of this happening was footprints supposedly left behind during the scuffle. And of course, all of them believed him. Later, Philippe, Ghislaine, Christine, and Charles Henry endlessly interrogated each other in the living room. What followed was a long and illogical discussion, filled with mindless accusations mostly directed at Christine. Sometime prior to this, Tilly told Ghislaine that he had information that Christine had an affair with her father-in-law, and that Christine had seduced him into sharing with her the whereabouts of the transmission. Tilly also said that Guillaume was the incestual love child of Christine and Guillaume's paternal grandfather. Denying this accusation did nothing for Christine. Every member of the 11 believed it. Even Christine's husband, Charles Henri, willingly accepted that Guillaume was not his son simply because Tilly said so. Eventually, they all agreed that it was in fact Christine who had knowledge of the treasure's location. She was then led into the basement where her imprisonment resumed. There she was ordered to sit on a stool while her family continued to interrogate her. Tilly explained to Charles Henri that because Christine underwent hypnosis years prior, that if she fell asleep during great moments of psychological distress, she would wake up with an insane mind. Despite his medical training, Christine writes that Charles Henri believed Tilly's outrageous claim and became terrified of letting her fall asleep. Thus, whenever she shut her eyes, he'd pinch her earlobes to wake her up. Without access to watches or clocks, they lost track of time. The interrogation continued with no end in sight. Sleep deprived and hungry, their irritation at Christine mounted as her responses became less and less coherent. Eventually, exhaustion took hold, and Christine made up an account number just to make it all stop. Soon she was forced to sit on a stool and face the wall. Tilly told her that she was unworthy of looking at the faces of her family members. Occasionally, she fell off the stool and needed to be helped back up. Tilly accused her of doing this on purpose. Then he ordered the others not to let her use the toilet. Later, unable to hold it in any longer, she urinated on herself. In time, Christine started to believe that she may in fact have the secret location of the treasure hidden somewhere inside of her subconscious. She tried her best to remember its location, but had no success in doing so. Later, she strung together a few random digits and names of banks, but when Tilly returned empty-handed, he became even more irate. He then assaulted her, punching her violently on the back while screaming threats and demands into her ear. Everyone watched, but no one intervened. With no results, Tilly reverted back to his favorite method of manipulation, divide and conquer. He accused her of having an affair with Ghislaine's ex-husband, Jean Marchand, and he claimed that he had videos and photos to prove it. Yet again, her family members accepted this unquestioningly, and they didn't even ask to see videos or pictures as proof. In her book, Christine writes, "From the top stair, my 3 children are watching me, at which point I react furiously and I deny it, the whole thing, protesting loudly that it is ridiculous and completely false. Ghislaine slaps me in the face, bellowing, 'Confess, just confess, he's got a video.' Eventually, exhaustion took hold of all of them. Charles Henri fell asleep while standing against a wall, and Philippe was too starved to continue. After 24 days of torture, the Inquisition of Christine finally came to a close. Then Tilly informed them that due to their failure to locate the hidden treasure, they would have to sell their beloved and ancient property, Chateau Martel. According to him, this was the only way that they would be able to continue to pay him for their protection. Somehow, this brought them momentarily back to their senses. For the first time in several years, they refused to follow his orders and sell Martel. However, their rebellion was short-lived. Tilly persuaded them that they could instead take out a mortgage on Martel, which they could pay back over the course of a few years. Later, they saw a notary agent who refused to aid them in the sale after receiving an anonymous tip that the family were the victims of mental manipulation. At which point, Guillaume called Tilly, who pretended to be his father on the phone while arguing with the notary agent for 3 hours. Eventually, Chateau Martel was sold for 460,000 euros, with the stipulation being that they could purchase the property back by paying a sum of 51,000 euros annually. As Ghislaine recalls in her book, that day in January 2008, we lost the family property. The money gained from the sale of Chateau Martel was of course pocketed by Tilly, who had no intention of paying the annual fee. Soon the hold Tilly had over the family started.
That seems like such a small amount. 400,000 euro? That's not very much money. Interesting. It seems like a very nice property, but only going for 400,000. That's super cheap. Super affordable.
To crack, and Philippe became the first member of the 11 to leave. One day in February of 2008, Tilly sat the family down to discuss the details of how he budgeted their money to pay his teams. Then suddenly, Philippe snapped and called him a crook. Tilly sat stunned momentarily before Ghislaine and Charles Henri quickly came to his defense. Ghislaine shouted, "You're losing your mind, Philippe." Charles Henri demanded that he explain himself. Then Tilly suddenly shouted, "He's got a knife in his pocket." Although Philippe showed them that there was nothing but lint in his pocket, the damage was done. Tilly had managed to regain control of the situation and make the others think that their brother Philippe had a knife even though he didn't. Philippe yelled, "You're all blind. Blind, blind, blind." Ghislaine's son Francois then ran down the stairs and attacked Philippe. Philippe punched him in the face with enough force to knock him backwards. Then Philippe bolted at Diane, threw himself onto her, and viciously bit her arm. Tilly reappeared in the midst of the chaos and yelled, "What's going on here? Do you realize the spectacle that you're offering here? If you don't immediately cease this sprawl, it'll go real bad for all of you, I promise. Do you seriously think I will continue to mobilize my teams to protect a bunch of mentally ill people that beat each other as if they were in a schoolyard? Cease this circus immediately, or I'll give the order to lift the protection around the home. The neighborhood is filled with killers. You would be left at best with 24 hours to live. Am I understood?" After things cooled down, Philippe walked up the stairs and away from the rest of the family. Charles Henri gave first aid to Diane, whose arm was bleeding from her uncle Philippe's bite. Charles Henri attended to Francois as well, who was fine. Christine stood motionless, with a dazed look on her face. On the 5th of February, Philippe, Bridget, and Ghislaine returned to Montflancan by plane. At his house, Philippe noticed that 2 plates were missing from the cabinet, and asked Ghislaine if she took them. She denied that she did, and Bridget tried to take the blame instead, but he didn't believe either of them. Then they sat to have breakfast. Immediately after breakfast was over, Philippe entered Ghislaine's room while she was trying to take a nap. Philippe locked the door behind him. He told her to call Tilly immediately and ask for 50,000 euros, while saying, "He's ruining us, and you see nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing." Then he attacked Ghislaine with an avalanche of blows. Her face and mouth quickly became covered with blood. Philippe seized the belt of her bathrobe and proceeded to strangle her with it. Ghislaine managed to liberate herself, but then Philippe started to smother her with a pillow. She nearly died before he realized what he was doing and managed to stop himself. Immediately after that, he called the police. When the police arrived, Philippe was taken to a psychiatric hospital, where he stayed for 2 weeks. His condition, as well as the 7 years under Tilly's control, made a hospital stay necessary. Ghislaine refused to press charges against him, which Tilly later scolded her for. On the 6th of February 2008, Philippe's daughter called Jean Marchand and told him what had happened. For several years, Philippe's children had distanced themselves from the family. When they first met Tilly in the year 2000, they found him to be ridiculous. They didn't believe that a secret agent with a law degree would be fixing computers at Ghislaine's school. They even investigated Tilly and found out that he had a criminal record. When they tried to tell their father Philippe, he laughed it off and explained that the charges were fabricated and just a part of Tilly's cover. By the time Philippe's daughter called Jean Marchand, any progress in the case had stagnated. There was a financial investigation into Tilly's money laundering which spoke lengths, but nothing came from it. When put into contact with the magistrate, his attempts to pick up the pace came with no success. Moreover, the first wave of articles and television specials about the family had passed. With no new updates in years, the media's interest had died down. A judge had taken an interest in the case, but it was not his highest priority. Additionally, Jean Marchand met with a lawyer named Daniel Picotin, who specialized in fighting against cults, but in order to take any action against Tilly, the authorities needed at least one of the 11 to testify against him. Philippe breaking free of Tilly's hold was a thrilling moment, as it was the lucky break that the case needed. Philippe was a direct victim, making him a potential catalyst for legal action against Tilly. A few days later, Philippe called Jean, and they met in Paris for breakfast at the National Assembly, a parliament building where Jean was working at. When Jean Marchand saw Philippe for the first time in 7 years, he writes that any ill will he felt towards him had suddenly dissipated. Philippe, he said, walked in with an uncertain gait and had a lost look in his eyes. He was no longer with Bridget, who had moved closer to her ex-husband and her children after being emancipated from Tilly's cult. Jean Marchand and Philippe spent the following week together. After years of seclusion, Philippe had a difficult time adjusting to the outside world. Jean Marchand writes that when they went shopping together, quote, Philippe looks at the shelves as if he can't see them. Although Philippe assured Jean that he was ready to tell him the whole story, and even said that he would sign anything that Jean presented him with, he didn't take any immediate action. Philippe instead procrastinated, lacking the strength and urgency to file a complaint or civil action. Whenever Jean Marchand pressed him to do so, Philippe argued that the others, still under Tilly's control, did not understand anything and that trying to help them would be a waste of time. After much pressure from Jean and his children, Philippe finally took legal action against Tilly. Jean Marchand writes, One day he called me and said almost triumphantly, "That's it, I did it." However, there was still a lot to be done before they could save the rest of the family, and before Thierry Tilly could be finally brought to justice. But there was one other major breakthrough. After reporting Tilly to the police, Philippe gave Jean Marchand a crucial piece of information. It was the address to the house that his wife and children were staying at in England. Immediately after that, Jean traveled to England, hoping that with Philippe's emancipation, this sordid tale would soon come to an end.
Wow, it's almost.
That's all you need to
Wow.
know now.
Okay, there's one one more part. Jeez, I didn't realize how long this was, or how long it would be. Hmm. Well, let's dive into it, I guess. Another 20 minutes.
Ok. Aïe.
Welcome to the final part of the Thierry Tilly series.
Okay.
Last time I left off with Jean Marchand obtaining the address to the home in England where his family was staying. On the 12th of March 2008, Jean Marchand arrived in Oxford and paid them a visit, putting them all into a state of panic. Remember, to them, Jean Marchand represented a mortal threat. They all believed that he was the leader of the cult that was targeting them. So his sudden appearance could only mean one thing, that he was there to kill them all. Upon seeing her ex-husband approach the home, Ghislaine called Tilly and asked him why his teams let Jean Marchand approach without stopping him. Tilly responded that he already told her 2 days prior that Jean was in Oxford, but she had simply forgotten. Then he ordered her to tell her son Francois to break Jean Marchand's face and chase him off.
Break his
Instead of
face.
fighting his father, Francois opened the door and told him to leave, and threatened to call the police. Jean Marchand pleaded with him, telling him that he just wanted to see them, and that he loved them. He said that he wasn't a danger, and that he had no intention to harm them. Then something strange happened. When Jean Marchand reminded Francois that it had been 7 years since they last saw each other, Francois said that he saw him 3 years prior, while in a taxi in Paris. He said that when their car stopped at a red light, Jean Marchand looked at him and smiled. Jean denied that this ever occurred, and argued that if he saw him, he wouldn't have smiled. Instead, he would do everything in his power to speak to him. Whether this was a false memory induced by Tilly, or if it was Francois' own imagination is unknown. But it speaks to just how incredible Thierry Tilly's brainwashing was. When their conversation ended, Francois told his father to go away. As he was leaving, Jean reminded him that he was his son, that he loves him, and that one day they would see each other again. After speaking with Francois in Oxford, Jean Marchand tried to visit his daughter Guillemette, who was living in Bristol. In October of 2007, Tilly separated her from the others, and relocated her to Bristol because she was beginning to question him. He ordered Guillaume to take her there by car. She was dropped off at a youth hostel and left with only 20 euros. Eventually, she found work at an Italian restaurant called San Carlo, located in Bristol's city center. There she met with a man named Giuseppe, who owned the restaurant, and they fell in love. The two married on the 6th of June, 2009.
Aww.
Neither her father, Jean Marchand, or her ex-husband, Sebastian, attended the wedding. Ironically, the perverse isolation that Tilly tried to impose onto Guillemette had in fact saved her, by allowing her to tie new links without his constant tailoring. Tilly tried to stop the marriage with underhanded comments about the groom-to-be, but had little success in doing so. When Jean Marchand visited the restaurant in March of 2008 and asked for his daughter, he was told that she didn't work there. Later, he learned that her boss and the whole staff were warned that if he were to visit, she should be told immediately so that she had time to flee. There's a member of the family who I've hardly spoken about throughout this series,
Okay.
and that's Christine and Charles Henri's eldest son, Guillaume.
Guillaume.
In Guillaume, Tilly found a bright, dependable, and resourceful asset. Therefore, Guillaume was allowed a degree of autonomy that the rest of the family was not. However, his life was still very much controlled by Tilly, who used him as a personal assistant of sorts. When the Vidrines found themselves facing a slew of legal proceedings, Guillaume quickly took action. He signed up for a correspondence course in law at the University of London and devoted himself to fighting their legal cases. Working with a tax lawyer, he spent nearly 6 years sorting through the family's documents and visiting courts. Soon he became a lawyer himself. In a passage from Christine's book, Guillaume writes, quote, "This lasted from the end of 2002 until October 2008. 6 years. I was 25 when this insane task was allotted to me, that of helping my parents and other family members with their judicial proceedings. But in time, Thierry would begin to demonize Guillaume and turn the rest of the family against him. First, he had Ghislaine sign a huge stack of papers, who in her blind faith signed away the rights to her property, her money, and the custody of her children, all to Guillaume. Moreover, Thierry had all of the funds acquired from the sale of Martel transferred into Guillaume's account before having it sent to his own. His reasoning for doing this was twofold. First, he hoped that anyone investigating the case would conclude that Guillaume was culpable of defrauding his own family, since the paper trail led directly to him. Secondly, he did this so he can tell the family that it was Guillaume who stole the money received from the sale of Martel, instead of him. Francois recalls that Thierry began to repeatedly tell him that he had evidence that Guillaume had drugged and raped Guillemette. He also kept saying that Guillaume was planning something against the family. After that, Thierry assigned Francois to accompany Guillaume wherever he went in order to watch him. Guillaume later learned that Thierry had been telling Ghislaine and the others that he was a traitor for months. In October of 2008, Thierry kicked Guillaume out of his house and told him that he had 4 days to restore everything he had stolen from his family. The next day, Guillaume received a formal demand to return the profits from the sales of their properties. Ghislaine even informed the police in Oxford that Guillaume was a crook and that he should be arrested on the spot. Then Thierry ordered them to sue Guillaume to recover their missing property and money. In time, a total of 6 legal actions were launched against Guillaume by his family. His father, Charles Henri, disowned him. Guillaume spent the next year fighting his family in court. Having no money for a lawyer, he defended himself. He writes, quote, "For months, every time I saw a police car, I imagined that it was sent by my family in response to some false allegation." After Guillaume, the next family member to leave was his mother, Christine. On February 17th, Thierry relocated Christine and Charles Henri to a little apartment in Oxford. There, the two found jobs. Charles Henri, who before meeting Thierry was a gynecologist and obstetrician, took up work as a gardener, and his wife, Christine, found a job at the Oxford Cheese Company. They both gave 90% of their earnings to Thierry. When Christine started working at the Oxford Cheese Company, she didn't even know what year it was. She walked with a terrible limp due to a hip injury that she sustained during her months of torture. However, she says that she took to her job quickly. There, Christine met with a man named Robert Paget de St. Victor, who would go on to help her break free of Thierry's hold. Robert says that although she was much older than the type of applicant he was looking for, he decided to hire her, perhaps to have someone around to speak French with. To Robert, Christine was a total mystery. He wondered why someone who spoke and behaved like a member of the upper class would take a menial job for €1,000 a month. Over time, she only told him bits and pieces about herself, leaving out anything about her years of sequestration and abuse. She was afraid that Robert was in league with Thierry and that he was testing her loyalty, so she held her tongue and gave him very little. Then one day, Thierry visited Robert and tried to entice him into a shady business deal. After their conversation, Robert asked Christine about Thierry. Fearing that it was a test, she said nothing. However, Robert did, exclaiming that he thought Thierry was a complete crook and a ridiculous charlatan. They left the conversation at that, but the next day Robert sat her down and asked her to tell him her story, and that she did. After telling him everything, she encouraged him to look up the recluses of Montflancan on the internet. The next morning, Robert informed her that he had spent the whole night researching her story. Then he persuaded her to make some calls. The first call that she made was to her sister. She left a voicemail and got a call back from her brother-in-law almost immediately. Then she called her old friend Mary Helene, who throughout the previous 9 years had worked tirelessly to help save her. Mary Helene met Christine a few days later in Oxford and took her back to France. Several hours after landing in France, Christine left a voicemail for Charles Henri, stating, "There it is then, Charles Henri. It was all too much too much. I had to get away. I love you." In less than 48 hours, Thierry concocted a story to justify Christine's escape, telling them that she never loved Charles Henri and that his first course of action should be to divorce her. He even went as far as convincing Diane into believing that she had been sexually abused by her mother and demanded that she make a formal complaint to the police, which she did. Ghislaine says in her book that the most impressive part of this ordeal was that they believed Thierry, and believed him without hesitation. On the 6th of March 2009, Jean Marchand received a call from Marie-Hélène, who told him that she was with Christine. After her escape, Christine still exhibited lingering psychological effects from her time under Tilly's control. For example, she initially refused to meet with Jean Marchand, as she was still terrified of him. Christine did, however, meet with Daniel Picotin, a lawyer and cult specialist who Jean Marchand had been working with since 2004. They met in Bordeaux, and after hearing her story, he explained to her the legal elements of the case. Then on the 29th of March 2009, Christine met with a judge who listened to her story. The judge decided to charge Thierry Tilly with abuse of weakness, sequestration aggravated by acts of cruelty, abuse of trust, and fraud. Then the judge asked her to lay low and avoid the media. However, all further developments in the case stalled for the next 7 months. The obstacle standing in their way was the English legal system, which was reluctant to cooperate. It seemed impossible to convince the English justice to validate the French steps towards arresting Tilly. First, England did not sign the Schengen Agreement in 1985, which is a treaty that led most European countries towards abolishment of their national borders. Secondly, the offense of abuse of weakness did not exist in English law. Although Tilly already had several charges in England, including money laundering, and although Scotland Yard had already raided his property, the British authorities still refused to cooperate with the investigation. However, with some ingenuity, the French authorities finally figured out a way to lure Tilly into custody. Through a wiretap operation, they learned that Tilly planned to escape to Switzerland. At the time, Tilly's passport and other papers were seized, so they were issued back to him in hopes that he would use the opportunity to flee from England to Switzerland, which is exactly what he did. Before he left England, he announced his departure to the Vidrines and explained that he would return once they had won the war against their enemies. On the 21st of October 2009, Thierry Tilly was arrested in Zurich. As he deplaned, he was met by Swiss authorities and promptly deported back to France. On October 26th, he was incarcerated, and on the 29th, he was indicted. Even still, his influence over 7 members of the Vidrines family continued. By the time they heard of his arrest, they all agreed that it was part of a cover-up. A team was put together to help members of the family who were still loyal to Tilly. This exfiltration team consisted of Daniel Picotin, a criminologist, a psychoanalyst, Jean Marchand, Christine, Philippe, Bridget, and a journalist. It was funded by Christine's friend Marie-Helene, in conjunction with others who were sympathetic to their cause. After 9 months of preparation, they all traveled to Oxford. The exfiltration operation was named Bow Window, and it was to take place on November 2nd, 2009. It was called Operation Bow Window because of Ghislaine's habit of looking out the window for possible threats. There were 2 exfiltration missions in total, dubbed Operation Bow Window 1 and Operation Bow Window 2. Operation Bow Window 1 was compromised by several events. First, a lawyer representing a newspaper requested that Jean Marchand sign a release of information. This resulted in an overwhelming amount of unwanted media coverage prior to the exfiltration mission taking place. Second, the actual exfiltration operation was half-baked and poorly organized. They planned to have a cult specialist pose as an MSA agent and visit the family presenting papers for Ghislaine's elderly mother Guillemette to sign, which would increase the amount of her pension. If all went smoothly, they hoped that Ghislaine would let the cult specialist in, whereupon she would tell Ghislaine the truth about Tilly, giving the rest of them time to enter the house and stage an intervention. Instead, it didn't work out like that at all. While the cult specialist and Ghislaine spoke, Ghislaine spotted Philippe at the end of the street, blowing their cover and ending the operation immediately. Later, Francois and Diane returned home from work, encountered the group, and then a short scuffle ensued. Police arrived in time to break it up and escorted the youngsters home. Following that, the exfiltration group voluntarily visited the police station to explain what they were doing. They told them of the ongoing investigation in France, of Tilly's arrest, and of their contact with Scotland Yard. A cop patiently listened to them and suggested that they write a letter to the 6 members of the family still under sequestration. The next morning, on Friday, November 13th, 2009, Ghislaine found a letter slipped under the front door, which was signed by Bridget, Christine, and Philippe. The letter explained that during Tilly's testimony to a judge, he called them lecherous and slimy people who ruined him. Although Ghislaine writes that receiving the letter put her trust in Tilly into significant doubt, she says that since the letter was signed by Bridget, Christine, and Philippe, but not Jean Marchand, she felt like it was a trap. That night, Ghislaine and Francois stumbled upon an episode of Café Crimes in which Jean Marchand was a guest, and the two recognized the behavior spoken of in the show.
Eventually, they decided that the journalists were being manipulated by Tilly's supranational organization in order to aid him in his mission duties. However, with Tilly in jail and the increasing frequency of desertions, it's unlikely that they weren't already experiencing considerable doubt by this point. Later, a French news team appeared at their doorstep, asking them for a statement about Tilly. From the second-story window, Ghislaine explained that Tilly wasn't the man that they thought he was, and that he's been a trustworthy confidant of the family for years. She called his arrest profoundly unjust, and called Christine a liar. The interaction was brief, but made headlines. On Saturday, December 12, 2009, Operation Bow Window 2 took place. The plan went as follows. A cult specialist would pose as a magistrate's emissary and read a transcript to Ghislaine of the negative things that Tilly had allegedly said of the family. The intention was to make her and the others feel betrayed, and thus permanently shake off whatever remained of their allegiance to Tilly. After hearing what Tilly had purportedly said about them, Ghislaine writes that she suddenly became overwhelmingly aware of the extent of Tilly's lies, and told the emissary that she was starting to understand and realize how awful things have really been. Following that, they all accepted with little hesitation that Tilly was a crook, and that they were all duped. As I alluded to earlier, by that point their commitment to Tilly was already faltering. He was in jail and there were certainly no teams watching their property or keeping their enemies away. After Tilly was arrested, they lived for months without hearing from him, left with not much to do and growing doubt, as well as countless visits from journalists, cult specialists, and their liberated family members. It was only a matter of time before reality was bound to reveal itself to them. That same night, the whole family redacted a letter to the judge, which would serve as their testimony against Tilly. Later, the family, with the exclusion of Jean Marchand Guillaume, met at a pub for a reunion. That same night, they took this photograph. Thierry Tilly's trial took place on September 24th, 2012. Prior to that, he spent 3 years in pretrial detention. The Vidrines decided to hold the trial in a magistrate's court, which meant that they wouldn't have to testify before a jury, and that the maximum penalty Tilly could receive would only be 10 years. They chose the magistrate's court because they felt that their story was one that was too convoluted and bizarre for a jury to accept. Christine writes, "Our helpless naivety might even provoke a smile. As for us, even we, when we look back over the whole affair, were incredulous." When Thierry Tilly appeared in court, he turned it into a circus. He said that he was a Catholic and disparaged the Vidrines for being mere Protestants. Then he called them a sticky lot. He insisted that the Vidrines had acted willingly, that he had lost money while trying to help what he described as a gang of resentful, greedy, provincial aristocrats. At times, he caused the court to erupt in laughter. In the witness box, he said that he was the king of Israel, that he was the heir of Napoleon III, that his family had participated in the birth of the French Communist Party, that he had been a hostage of the Freemasons, that he was a general, that he could speak 8 languages fluently, including Celtic and Russian. He also said that he was the richest man in France and the founder of Greenpeace. Additionally, he claimed he played a game of chess with Grandmaster Garry Kasparov, and that their game ended in a draw. He then pointed to the Vidrines and said, quote, "They are members of my family. I have known them since childhood. I have more than 500 names. I am the richest man in France. I have no interest in ruining the Vidrines." When one of the Vidrines' lawyers called him a mixture of Rasputin and Machiavelli, he responded by saying he once offered a copy of The Prince to a Libyan ambassador, who in thanks offered him a signed copy of the Quran. Later, Tilly explained to the judge, quote, "I told you 80% of the truth. I apologize for the 20% fantasy." The judge and the magistrates were said to have seemed half amused, half annoyed. The trial lasted for 2 weeks, from September 24th to October 5th. Court testimony from those who knew Thierry Tilly as a child described him as having been a loner who was clumsy and shy, but also cunning. Thierry Tilly's father refuted many of his claims in court, denying them as mere fantasy. He added that
Can you have bipolar, like, can you have a manic episode that lasts for 7 years or 11 years or however long this was going on for? This guy's not bipolar. This guy's crazy. I don't know how.
that although he never had any doubt that his son was bright, he was always a difficult child. During his testimony, Thierry Tilly accused his father of beating him severely while he was a toddler and leaving him physically damaged for life. His father responded with, "It's all deception and distortion." He concluded his testimony by saying, "If I had been harder on him, things wouldn't have come to this." The most damning testimony came from Christine, who recounted the torture she suffered for 6 months in January of 2008. Her son Omri broke down a few minutes after his testimony, collapsing into her arms after speaking about the 7 months he spent isolated in an office unit provided by Tilly. During an interview, Christine said, quote, "He could have just ruined us, but his enjoyment was to dominate and control us. How could I forgive everything he did?" Thierry Tilly was sentenced to 8 years in prison for the illegal arrest, kidnap, imprisonment, or arbitrary detention of a hostage, for violence against a vulnerable person, and for the criminal exploitation of the ignorance or weakness of a person in a state of psychological or physical subjection.
8 years? Wow. That's crazy. That's even crazier than him being crazy. 8 years? This is 11 people, and he's wrecked the lives of like at least 11 people for like 11 years. I don't remember the year. Maybe I'm mixing up the numbers here, but something like between 7 to 11 years. So 10 years, we'll just say. 10 years of life kind of torpedoed of 11 people, a full family. And he gets 8 years in prison. It's not as bad as what he did. It's like not even proportionate to the amount of damage he did to one person, which is fascinating. But maybe it'll stop him from being a crook further. 8 years to refine it. Yeah, well, I don't know how French jails are, but interesting. Wow, that's a fascinating. 8 years is not. That seems like a weirdly low number. Though maybe the rehabilitation in France is very good, in which case that's pretty good. That seems kind of.
His accomplice, Jacques Gonzalez, was sentenced to 4 years for complicity
He got
and
4 years?
concealment of abuse of weakness. After his conviction, Tilly announced to the court that he was in fact a British national, and that he would appeal in the European Court of Justice. Prior to that, Tilly did not invoke his rights as a British national, or even mention it to his lawyer. Dramatically, Tilly told the court, quote, "We will show what European law is. This is only the beginning." Then he said, "When I get out of here, whatever the verdict, I will go to the Intelligence Service of London, and in view of my rank, I will be reinstated. I, who graduated from luxury marketing, everything I hear here does not correspond to the facts. I will appeal to the justice of England and America."
Does he also need to go to an institution for being? He maybe needs to get checked up a little bit. Maybe just evaluate it for a moment. We never know what's going on. Maybe all of us can take a time, a little bit of extra effort to make sure that all of our screws are tied in tightly. Maybe this guy needs to get checked out because he's sounding a little strange. These crazy claims. And it seems like he's going beyond just lying for to manipulate, right? Because he's continuing to lie after he's getting arrested. Doesn't make any sense.
The transcript, he continues by talking about his career as a police commissioner, and the court erupted in laughter. 1 year later, Thierry Tilly took his case to the Bordeaux Court of Appeal, where his sentence was increased to the maximum penalty of 10 years. Tilly was also ordered to pay 80,000 euros in damages to Christine.
Only 80,000. Wow, he tried to appeal his 8-year sentence and got more. Is that even that? How is that possible? Dang. That's wow. And then, of course, so he's giving 80,000 to Christine, but then didn't Charles send Christine's husband, send like hundreds of thousands of euros to him from his gynecology business already? She's only getting 80,000.
And 60,000 euros to Omri. In prison, he received very few visitors. He spent most of his time drafting numerous handwritten letters which he sent to the judge, the contents of which were often nonsensical and conspiratorial. He also continued to control others inside of prison as well, and had to be relocated due to his manipulations. After finishing his 10-year sentence, he was directly transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where he still remains. His lawyer called it an unlawful detention. Quote, "Tilly is not a crook like the others. He is not one to flee to the Bahamas. He is a mythomaniac who lives in a universe forged in his readings. A Don Quixote, a particular and strange personality. Now he is looking for a haven of peace, so his head can rest and recover from confinement. While under the influence of Tilly, the Vadrines sold their properties, stock portfolios, jewelry, and handed their salaries and pensions to him. After their liberation, a financial investigation estimated that they lost 4.5 million euros. However, 2 million euros remains unaccounted for, and is perhaps hidden in bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. So far, only 220,000 euros of their money has been recovered. Additionally, the Vadrines never recovered Chateau Martel. They won in civil court against a real estate agent who was shown to have acted in bad faith when he sold their property, but they cannot prove the same about the current owners. According to one of France's leading psychiatrists, Daniel Zagari, Tilly used common strategies of cult leaders, con artists, and master manipulators. Daniel Zagari writes that this method was employed in a series of phases. First, Tilly observed his victims for faults and weaknesses. He had an answer for all of their concerns, and he proved himself as someone capable of fixing their problems. Second, he induced group paranoia through fear of unknown dangers, and positioned himself as the only one who could save them. He isolated them, cultivating a paranoid siege mentality. He told them to cut off all ties with the outside world and sequester themselves. Third, once they were enslaved, they lost trust in their own thoughts and autonomy. Hence, a process of infantile regression followed, in which they were primed to be exploited. He rendered them into children, dependent on him as a parental figure, and for their own survival. Like a small child's dependency on their caregiver, he became their savior, guardian, and protector. Thus, rationality, logic, intelligence, the critical faculty, or quite simply, autonomy of thought, disappeared. All that being said, he adds that, quote, "The mistake that the Vadrines made lay without doubt in its shared belief that they were of noble lineage." As Maria Konnikova writes in her book, The Confidence Game, Tilly appealed to the sense they had of themselves as belonging to a distinct and proud minority of French aristocrats. Tilly didn't just create a fantastical story. He created a fantastical story in which the aristocratic family became guardians of a precious part of history. He knew that they were proud of their heritage, and so used that heritage as an entry point into their trust. They weren't simply an aristocratic family. They were an exceptional aristocratic family with a legacy no one else could ever dream of.
You're special.
And that legacy was under threat of extinction. It was their duty, no, their calling, to protect it, to prove themselves exceptional and worthy of the trust history had placed in them. In other words, he made them feel special, and they bought it.
Wow. Charles Henry, or Henri. Okay, I'm going to have to actually read this because he's not speaking anymore. Okay. An annoying effect that I don't really like, but okay, we'll stick with it. Charles found work at the Gironde General Council as coordinating doctor for maternal and child protection. In 2014, he resumed his gynecology and obstetrician practice. Charles Henry right there. Charles. How's his wife? Christine, his wife, and Charles Henry were the only ones who lost everything. Oh no, they lost 3 million euros and all of their properties. The torture she endured from Tilly left her with a permanent limp. And remember, she got 80,000 euro for this. She lost 3 million, she got 80,000. But what, tell us, like, did she get a job? She's working at the bakery still or whatever? What happened to her? Nothing. Ghislaine and Jean are started with Ghislaine here. Ghislaine and Jean on the 30th of October 2010, Ghislaine and Jean remarried. Aw. I think that's a good thing. I don't know. It took place on the same day as their first marriage in 1976. Dang, how can you rebuild your trust for that? Can you rebuild your trust? Oh man. Okay, Jean is loyal. It's a type of loyalty that's hard to come across right there. Okay, Ghislaine. All right, remarried, happily ever after there. Philippe was able to keep his house because his ex-wife prevented him from selling it. Very good. Philippe gave Tilly over 500,000 euro over the course of the 6 years. Philippe and his wife, I think his wife is Brigitte. Okay. Brigitte. Guillaume, this is the kid, Guillaume, set up a consultation company for social and family protection. Oh, now he's one of like the secret people who are protecting. Okay, interesting. Amaury consulted with psychiatrists who helped him get a foothold in the real world. Wow. He resumed his studies and thanks to financial aid from families and friends. Oh, how nice is that? He studies a degree in business management. Okay, Amaury. Francois. The last information about him is from over 9 years ago. Francois stayed in England, occasionally shaken by nervous tics. He works in fast food restaurants, so he still works at Burger King. And on advice of Tilly to work at Burger King and Zara. Okay. There you go. Didn't turn out well for everybody. Hey, Diane, she married somebody else and she graduated in chemistry. Okay, wow. Diane, maybe? Diane? I don't know French. Guillemette has 2 children. She stays in Bristol now. Guillemette, the mummy, she died in her sleep about 11 years ago. Okay, wow. Hospitalized in Bordeaux. She died at 98. What a ripe old age of 98 there. Okay. They met. Did she like reconnect with her family? Did they all love each other before she died? You know, we want some information like that. But okay, she's dead. Well, hopefully she was fine. That's it. We didn't get to hear about Sebastian. There were so many other folks that I don't remember the names of. But okay, well, there you go. We didn't hear about the other Guillemette. Okay. Wow. What a crazy story. Watch out for con artists and conspiracy theorists and cult leaders because they will take your money and your life. Apparently. Okay, that was a little bit wild. Let's get into something less wild. Okay, something much more wholesome. Let's just learn about tea. I haven't been drinking any tea. So let's learn about tea. You don't have any money, what do they take? Well, they'll take your dignity in your life. That's all.
Hi.
Hey.
Quite often we get a question, is it possible to get tea drunk or to get high off tea? And surprisingly, the question is yes.
Can you get high off of tea? You can be high on life. You can get high off of anything. But tea is special.
However, the state of being tea drunk or tea high is not something that some people could be imagining. It's not similar to being drunk on alcohol or to be high of weed or other drugs. It's rather a relaxed state where you feel blissful
almost
and
flying.
Connected with everything around.
You feel like you're almost flying. You're creative, you're emotional, you're introspective. Okay.
Around you and
light, uplifted, giddy, euphoric. You feel very content and peaceful and grateful for all of your surroundings. It's lovely.
And grateful for the people in your life.
All the lovely people.
And you feel extra creative.
And a weensy teensy eensy whip trippy. You get this deep concentration with everything and everyone around you. For me, I feel this sort of hyper focus, yet this sort of like hair trigger on my attention, so I can very quickly switch to random things, but then get really absorbed into them. It's quite beautiful and lovely and fun.
Alert. And such state is known for centuries and is called chazui or tidrong.
Tidrong.
And today we're gonna discuss how to achieve this state.
Well, first things first, you got to be drinking tea, Camellia sinensis. Good stuff. Doesn't quite work with herbal teas. I've been trying for the last 2 weeks or something. And right now I'm drinking, well, I was drinking some roasted bitter melon tea. Bitter melon tea, which I think is a staple or a common type of tea in Korea. And I gotta say, I didn't like it.
Because it is indeed very possible, and many people who are serious about the tea practice has experienced this state.
Oh yeah.
So let's see what's responsible for such state. What does make a person tea drunk? There are main elements that all teas that come from Camellia sinensis, and all teas come from Camellia sinensis plant, contain. And first of all, there is caffeine, and all of us are familiar with caffeine, and caffeine gives us this feeling of alertness, and it just like groups us together and gives us energy boost.
Yeah.
The second element is L-theanine.
Theanine. What does that smell like? What is that tea that he's drinking? It seemed really nicely oxidized or maybe roasted. What was that he's drinking? L-theanine stimulates alpha brain waves. Wow. Alpha. You're a true alpha. It puts us in a state of alertness, creativity, and relaxed meditative space. L-theanine is a relaxer and anxiety reducer. Okay.
L-theanine is exclusive to teas only, and this element gives us the feeling of happiness. And calmness, and it's very good for anxiety because it calms a person down and relaxes. And
I like this guy. Did you see what he just did there? My guy is, well, he's conserving the water. He doesn't want to waste 100 milliliters of water, maybe 200 milliliters. I don't know how big his pot is. He pours the water into his pot to warm it up and maybe clean the dust off of it, but clearly not to clean the dust off of it because he puts it into his pot, puts it into his pitcher, puts it in his cup, and he pours it all back into his kettle to reuse the water because why not? You're just using it to warm. It's not being wasted. If you're purifying your cups, if you think about using your water to clean your cups, it doesn't make sense to put the water back into your kettle because that doesn't seem to be the process of cleaning. But I guess boiling still makes it clean, whatever. But to warm it, if you're just using it to warm it, you can throw it back in there. Why not? Reuse it. I like it. Resourceful.
In conjunction with caffeine, it kind of subdues the effect of caffeine, makes it more smooth, so we don't have this caffeine jitters.
You tried some L-theanine pills. Well, why not recommend some tea instead? Maybe get yourself some good tea. That'd be much better than trying L-theanine pills separate from how nature designed it to be. Use it in its natural form. Why not? It feels good. Highly recommend.
When we drink tea. So it calms down a person. It has this calming effect. And thirdly, there are catechins.
Catechins are antioxidants, and one of the main reasons you might feel high after drinking tea, especially abundant in the shaded green teas such as gyokuro or matcha. Oh wow, Catechins. Okay, get yourself some catechins here.
Catechins is probably one of the most important elements responsible for this state of being tea drunk, of feeling this happiness.
We can definitely verify that matcha and gyokuro will most certainly send you to the moon. That's some lovely stuff. I love gyokuro. It's so good. It's so potent, and it has this lovely mouthfeel. It's just beautiful. Matcha also. But that'll get me buzzed in the caffeine way too. Matcha doesn't give me tea drunk. Gyokuro, definitely, I'll get tea drunk from that. But matcha, that'll just make me bounce off the walls. Craziness because it's so much caffeine. Anyway.
So all three in conjunction, working together, may bring you to this state. Now, there are a few tricks to it. First of all, by drinking tea as we used to in the West, in big teapots and big cups, it doesn't give us the concentrated enough amount of tea to get there, because just by itself regularly there is not enough of these elements to break the brain blood to brain barrier.
Let's try to interpret a little bit what you say here. If we brew our tea in a normal way, where it's a little bit more diluted because there's a little bit more water, less tea, that makes it so that the minerals don't get into your blood properly, and there's not enough minerals in your blood to pass through the blood-brain barrier, which is what makes you get high. I'm just following along with what he's saying. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense because I don't know a lot about biology and how, all these chemicals and things interact in your blood and your brain and your body and all that stuff. But does dilution matter? If you're having the same amount of the substance, would it make a difference in how it absorbs into your blood? And would that make a difference with how it goes into your blood-brain barrier? Why is that even necessary? I don't know. Interesting. Okay.
So in order to break this barrier, we have to drink this tea in a concentrated form.
Don't break it.
Like I'm doing right now, for example. I put quite a lot of tea for small amount of water. So the ratio of tea to water is quite low. So lots of tea, not that much water. It's approximately, I put 7 grams of tea per 200 milligrams of water. And I don't brew it for too long, but I do multiple.
He corrected milligrams of water to milliliters. Little does he know, grams and liters are the same in water. Of course, water translates very easily. The amount of liters is the amount of grams. He didn't need to correct himself. He was technically correct.
Infusions, one after another, one after another, one after another, and I get this concentrated brew that is quite similar to espresso, you can say. You can compare one to espresso.
Interesting.
So this way.
So my question is here, not about the concentration, not about how much he's drinking, just how concentrated it is. So let's say he drinks this full 200 milliliters here, he's going to get a little bit of some sort of effect. Now, if he poured this 200 milliliters into a gallon of water, or into like a gallon minus 200 milliliters, or I'm mixing so many units here. So if he mixed another 800 milliliters to make a full liter, 1 liter of water, very diluted tea, and he drank that, would the effect of it change at all or not? It seems like he's drinking the same amount of tea. It just happens to have he's drinking water along with it. And why would that change anything about how your blood is absorbing it? But I don't know enough about. I don't know anything about biology and how that works. I don't even know what phenomenon I'm describing here. But it doesn't, for me, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. if I'm drinking, like if I drink a little bit of cyanide, if I just eat a bunch of cyanide and I mix the cyanide in water and drink it, I can't imagine how that's going to make any difference. So, but of course, obviously, cyanide's a poison. That's a little bit different from how whatever these things are interacting with each other. So I'm not entirely sure how that works.
After drinking many of such cups, you may be able to break this blood to brain barrier to get enough of these elements to start feeling the effect called chazuyo, chi drunk or chi high.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Secondly,
this is the
not
guy.
every tea.
This is a guy that I really like. I don't know why, but the way that he speaks, he just seems so chill. He's speaking very slowly. He's enunciating very well here. Maybe just because he's speaking a second language or something, but he seems to be so chill, and I like it. I like the energy that he's giving out here. I'm a fan.
Can get us there. So there are a few conditions that you have to meet.
Okay.
It has to be high quality tea.
Good tea.
Loose leaf, high quality tea. Secondly,
or matcha, which is not loose leaf, but high quality matcha.
The least processed is the tea, the better. So the best teas for it are probably white teas, because white teas are the least processed of 5 types of tea. They just, after tea leaves getting picked, they're just withered and sun-dried, and that's all the processing that they undergo. Then secondly, green teas, yellow teas, and light oolongs. Also, the green type of pu'er called shank pu'er also can get you there. And let's discuss why.
Okay.
So
You don't think Shopur gets there?
high quality tea, least processed tea, or minimum amount of processing.
Okay.
Then we need to pick the teas that are composed of young leaves, or even better, buds and very young leaves. So such teas are once again white tea. For example, yin zheng. These are just strictly buds, or green teas that are comprised of very, very young leaves, small young leaves.
Oh, MS here is giving us some knowledge. The liver is the finest filter organ, and if there's too much poison, it can't handle, so that barrier breaks. If it's not diluted, it filters more poison in less time. If you dilute the poison, you get the right dose in the right time. The timing is very important for poisons. Oh, okay, interesting. That makes a bit of sense. That makes a bit of sense. Yeah, okay.
First 1-2 leaves picked at the very, very early spring, because these leaves, the first leaves, they contain the most of L-theanine, of catechins, of caffeine, because all these elements, they were stored in a plant during winter, and in spring the first leaves, they have the most concentrated amount of these.
Okay. Oh.
And also teas that come from old trees. We call it ancient trees, gushu. Trees that are a couple of 100 years old, that really have a very strong root system, and they're able to pull out the minerals from the ground and store them in the leaves. So usually such teas are raw or shank pu'er, and that's probably one of the reasons why shank pu'er became so popular lately, because this tea really gives you energy and quite often gets you to the state of being tea drunk or tea high, or what's called in China chazui. And all of these together, these are important factors. Another one is mindfulness, and the person has to be relaxed. I'll be honest with you, getting tea drunk doesn't come on a whim. It doesn't come like if you'll sit down and you will put a goal to achieve this state, it will probably not happen. You have to be really relaxed, you have to really let go. That's one of the tricks, that's your Zen, that's your Tao. You just let go, you go with the flow, you pay attention to your tea practice, you enjoy the moment, you being in the moment, you letting all your worries pass, you are with tea, enjoying tea, drinking cup after cup after cup, skillfully preparing it, which is called gonfucha.
Don't drink tea on an empty stomach. Why not? Certainly have some light snacks, nuts, or fruit before or during your tea ceremony. Interesting. I wonder why not. Why not? I drink tea on an empty stomach every single day. Why not?
This is what I'm doing right now. And then, you're enjoying your company.
Don't drink tea on a full stomach. Since the body needs more time to absorb the tea, you might miss out on some of those wonderful effects. So don't eat a lot, but eat a little bit.
Maybe, but just not getting lost into giggles and conversations. And then at some point, you may find yourself smiling from ear to ear, feeling blissful, feeling extra creative, feeling very grateful for the moment, for your state, for the being.
Yeah, you might become a hippie.
And yes, it's a tricky thing to achieve this state, but once you're in it, you will really appreciate it. One thing though that I have to mention, like pretty much everything in this life, getting tea drunk has two sides of the coin. Not everybody experiencing it. It all depends on your constitution, on how you react to certain elements, to caffeine, and so on and so forth. But I can tell you from my own experience, sometimes after getting high on tea, I feel a little bit down when the effect of tea is wearing off. That means I feel a little cranky, a little agitated, a little tiny bit anxious. So don't be surprised if you feel something like this. It is totally normal because it's taking a toll, like everything in our life, like all change.
I do not feel this, whatever he's describing here. This is fascinating to me, but I can imagine having a crash after drinking tea, but I've never experienced, at least I don't think I've experienced any of these sort of anxious or whatever other effects he's saying, having any crash after drinking tea. It's very gentle, and it just kind of tapers off, and you feel pretty normal after, for me at least, personally. So, interesting.
Changes, all consumption, any consumption is taking toll on your organism. So be mindful of that. Do not overdo it. Do not try to chase this state too often. Just, enjoy it when it comes and be happy when you're just, drinking good tea.
Yes, and make sure you don't have a caffeine addiction, because caffeine addiction is a problem. So you want to make sure you don't have a caffeine addiction. So don't drink too much tea, because that will lead to caffeine addictions, and it'll mess up your sleep. And if you're sleeping poorly, it won't matter how tea drunk you are, because you're gonna feel awful because you're gonna be sleepy, and being sleepy sucks. So don't do that. Be careful of caffeine addictions.
Which is great on its own. So I hope that you will find this information helpful, and to being tea drunk. Cheers.
Cheers. Well, there you go. Oh, and we've got a video right after this. Okay, let's watch this video too. which is about caffeine and sleep. Good day. Well, a good day to you, sir. How are you today?
Just one dose of caffeine in the evening decreased the amount of deep sleep by 20%.
20%?
Now, you would have to normally age by about 15 years to produce that type of a deficit in your deep sleep.
Oh my God, 1 dose of caffeine. What is a dose? Matthew, tell it, what is a dose? He just coming in straight up with the hot takes, hard hitter. But I don't even know what the heck a dose is. 1 dose of caffeine can deprive you of 20% of your deep sleep, which is 15 years off of your life, equivalent to 15 years later. This is awful.
Or you can do it every single night by having a cup of coffee.
Listening to a lot of The Saint. Oh, that sounds nice.
How much of a sleep disruptor is caffeine?
But caffeine is a misunderstood drug. Certainly,
it's a drug, right? You use the term drug, and that's interesting.
It is a drug. It's what we call a psychoactive stimulant. Everyone knows that caffeine can help alert you and sort of keep you awake. That's the thing that's most known. Caffeine, if you look at some data, is probably the second most traded commodity on the surface of the planet after oil, which I think says everything about our sleep-deprived state. The other thing about caffeine, however, that most people don't realize is the time that it is in your system. So most drugs have what we call a half-life, the amount of time it takes for half of that drug to be essentially excreted out your system. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 or 7 hours, and it's a little dependent on what type of gene that you have to sort of metabolize the caffeine, but on average, it's about that. But what's interesting is that caffeine has a quarter life of about 12 hours. What this means is that if you have a cup of coffee at noon, a quarter of that caffeine is still circulating around your brain at midnight. What? So to put that in context, it would be the equivalent of getting into bed and just before you turn the light out, you swig a quarter of a cup of Starbucks and you hope for a good night of sleep.
Good luck.
You would never do that because, but that's exactly, unfortunately, what people do.
This is why we don't need to be drinking coffee or tea or anything at noon. Let's not do that, please. No. No coffee.
Completely innocently by drinking caffeine, still too late in the afternoon.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
I think it's a big problem in society. Another way to quantify this is if you just look, and I've checked out the data from the Financial Times, the number of Starbucks coffee houses that have arisen over the past 30 years is just like an exponential increase. And I think that is an expression of how we're self-medicating our state of sleep deprivation in developed nations.
You call it a drug. I agree with you. It is a psychoactive substance that we use liberally. We let our children have it. We're not even... we often don't think.
Are kids allowed to have caffeine? I guess. When do kids start drinking like sodas? Do you have to be like in? You don't let babies drink soda, right? You don't let toddlers drink soda, do you? I hope not. Do you let toddlers drink soda? But it seems like once you're in school age, people drink stuff. So you can drink sodas, you can drink coffees, and when you're like in middle school or elementary school, right? Oh man. This is pernicious. It starts so early. This is awful.
About the implications of that, and so many patients of mine tell me that, Dr. Chachi, I know, if caffeine can be a problem for some people, I'm not one of those. Caffeine is fine.
Everyone thinks that they're the special person who is not affected. Don't be silly.
But more often than not, when they either reduce their intake or cut it out completely, the sleep quality goes up. Yeah. And Sachin Panda, Professor Panda, who, I know you know very well, you both sort of follow each other's research. He was on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he was saying routinely every year he will have a bit of a detox from caffeine. He'll go off caffeine. And he says, when I do that, I have a headache for a few days, but my sleep always improves. I've got more energy, and my productivity dramatically increases, and I think that says it all, really.
Yeah,
it does. And a number of points that you made that I'd love to circle back around to. Firstly, caffeine is the only psychoactive stimulant that we do give to our children readily, which is, I think, a concern. And I'm not trying to be sort of finger pointing or finger wagging. Again, I think it's just that parents probably don't understand the impact of caffeine in that regard. I think the second point comes on to your comment of some people say, look, I'm one of those people who can drink a cup of coffee in the evening, have an espresso after dinner, and I fall asleep fine and I stay asleep. Now, even if that's true, there was an alarming study that was done where they gave people just one single cup of coffee, a dose of 200 milligrams of caffeine, standard cup of coffee. And then they measured the quality of their deep sleep by tracking these big, powerful brain waves, these glorious, beautiful deep brain waves that bathe all of our brain during deep sleep at night, and it helps also restore the body. And what they found was that just one dose of caffeine in the evening decreased the amount of deep sleep by 20%. Now, you would have to normally age by about 15 years to produce that type of a deficit in your deep sleep, or you can do it every single night by having a cup of coffee. And what's interesting is that those people will wake up the next morning. They won't remember waking up because they may not have woken up, but the quality of their deep sleep was so poor that they will still then feel unrestored and unrefreshed by their sleep.
I need more caffeine.
And so here is the irony that now they're starting to reach for 2 cups of coffee rather than one, and so develops this dependency cycle.
You're addicted. This is what happens. I can't do one. No. Now I need 2. But it doesn't affect me at all. Now I just need to drink 3 cups of coffee in the morning. But I'm not affected by it one bit. Are you sure, buddy?
Sort of addiction spiral, as it were. So I think people are perhaps unaware of the true impact of caffeine, how long it sticks around within your system, and even if you feel that you're immune to that evening cup of coffee, how it will still impact your sleep, even though consciously you know nothing about it.
Well, I think, you raised a really important point there, Matthew, about, knowledge and awareness. None of us are pointing fingers. I understand caffeine is everywhere. I probably used to overdrink caffeine, and I've altered my behavior as I've learned more and more about the research. And I think what we're trying to do is raise awareness of, caffeine is a sleep disruptor. There's just no question about that. And, we can dress it up any way we want, but it is a sleep disruptor. So if anyone is listening to this, if that story that Matthew just mentioned resonates with you, I'd really sort of encourage you to have a little think about your caffeine usage and just see if can you wind it down a little bit? Can you see, bit by bit, if by reducing...
Can you wind it down a little bit? Do you think? You think it's possible for you to stop taking the caffeine a little bit? Just ease off on it, maybe, potentially, possibly?
It improves your quality of sleep. The recommendation I make in my book is enjoy your caffeine before noon. And I say enjoy because I get it. People love it. Right? I love.
He's got the same advice I give, man. Before noon. It's simple enough. Do it before noon. Take your drugs in the morning. It's that easy. Easy.
A good cup of coffee, but I will not have caffeine after midday.
Yeah, and I've now actually done what Sachin has done. I routinely go through sort of a caffeine detox, but I too would enjoy that cup of coffee or a nice strong cup of, Yorkshire tea. I have no relationship with them, by the way, in the mornings. And I also love the coffee culture as well. I go out with friends and we grab coffee all the time. And I love that. And I want people to embrace it because I think it's fantastic that there's a social movement sort of circulating around that. All I would say, though, is that, decaffeinated coffee is actually really quite good.
Well, there you go.
And I would struggle, and I'd love to do the sort of, the Coke Pepsi challenge with decaf and caffeinated. Just in terms of the taste, you will probably notice that it wouldn't give you sort of the shakes or that sort of slightly anxious state.
Good
and you probably
advice.
know the difference. But I've really become enamored with decaffeinated coffee. And
Is there So he's talking about coffee culture, right? Which maybe just going to coffee shop, hanging out with your friend or something like that. But for the coffee snobs out there, for all the hoity-toity coffee experts out there, is there a decaf coffee that's good quality? I wonder. I'm not a coffee drinker, so I don't think I've ever had decaf coffee before. I don't drink a lot of coffee. I've had only a couple times in my life. So I can't really say if there's a difference between the two, but certainly there is probably much more expertise in the field of normal coffee rather than in a decaf coffee. If we're going for the folks who are experts or snobs or, those folks out there, coffee sommeliers.
All of its flavors. And I love the cafe bar culture. So I love to embrace that. But I do like what you're saying about sort of patience, just thinking a little bit about caffeine and considering it and just try the experiment. Sort of set yourself the task, give it a go, and see if it works for you.
Yeah, I remember about a month after my book came out, someone tweeted me and said, I never ever thought that caffeine was a problem for me, but I've read your book, I've taken your recommendation, I now only have 2 cups of coffee and I have it before noon, and I've never slept this well in over 30 years. And it's just incredible how such a common thing that people are doing day to day may be impacting our sleep. And I think you make a really good point that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more caffeine you drink, the more you need, the more dependent you become, the less good your sleep is. And it just continues. I think we also have to highlight, we're talking about coffee, but I think tea would be similar because it contains caffeine. Green tea, a herbal tea that often people switch to when they're not having tea or coffee, is also a highly caffeinated drink, so may affect you. As you became more and more aware of all this sleep research,
what herbal tea is caffeinated? What herbal tea is caffeinated? I mean, chocolate, I guess, would be tea that's caffeinated, but what other tea is caffeinated?
Biggest thing in your own lifestyle that you changed on the back of your research?
3 to 4 cups of filtered coffee in the morning is a net benefit for your health, according to some studies. Okay, how about that? Yeah, how about that? There may be benefits. It may not, reduces your overall mortality by all causes by 10%. And you don't find any negative effects, 0 negative effects. Jeez, we gotta look into these studies.
I think it was probably caffeine.
4 cups seems like a lot of coffee. Do people drink 4 cups of coffee in the morning? That's a lot of coffee.
I think just seeing the data and then doing those types of studies ourselves, and particularly the finding that we discussed where even if you're asleep, the quality of that sleep is just not as deep. That really got me concerned, and that's when I really started to pay attention to my caffeine content.
And are you teetotal now with caffeine, or are you?
So right now, yeah, I am. I drink decaffeinated tea and I drink decaffeinated coffee. I sometimes, I've ebbed and flowed between sort of having coffee in the morning because I do feel it's alerting benefits, but we didn't necessarily evolve to be medicated with caffeine. And I think anyone who's, drinking caffeine at 11 a.m.
We didn't necessarily evolve to do anything. What a silly argument. I mean, okay, he's a communicator, I guess. He's trying to convince people to not drink coffee, but it's a silly thing to say. At any point in time, you can arbitrarily say that everybody's evolved to do whatever it is that they're doing currently, because evolution is the process that led you to this moment. So yes, everything that happened beforehand is evolved to do whatever it is here. Or you can just arbitrarily say you haven't evolved to do that based on how other people may react to certain substances, or if you just assume that it's a bad effect that you don't like, and you say you're not evolved for it. But that's kind of a silly argument. It's not really an argument at all. It's just nonsense. Okay, Matthew, you're losing me here, Matthew. But still, I'm on board with the coffee stuff and the sleeping stuff. Sleeping gets good.
a.m., which on the basis of your circadian rhythm, if you listen to the wonderful podcast with Sachin Panda that you did, your peak of your circadian rhythm is right around sort of the 11 o'clock period. That's when it should be almost impossible for you to fall asleep. But yet, I sometimes look around on an airplane when I'm leaving and people, half the plane is asleep at 11 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you're self-medicating your sleep deprivation at 11 a.m. with caffeine, it usually means that you're perhaps just not getting enough sleep. And that's probably been one of the greatest, I think, influential factors. That and the impact on my productivity. I think that was the most underrated. And it actually forced me to start doing a lot of research on sleep loss and productivity that maybe on a second podcast we can talk about.
We can get into, yeah.
Yeah, this is, fascinating. I'd love to hear more about the sleep loss and productivity and all other factors that are associated with sleep deprivation. And I wonder if there's ways to figure out if drinking coffee and caffeine and all this stuff is good for you, bad for you, whatever in the studies, right? And if that's related to just generally how we treat sleep in our society at all, right? Because even if you stop drinking caffeine, but you still sleep poorly, well, that's not going to be helpful at all. The whole point for what he's referring to here, Matthew, is sleeping well and to stop drinking caffeine in order to sleep better. However, you could just stop drinking caffeine and still sleep poorly, and you might just be worse off because it'd be hard to be productive if you're just sleepy and you don't have this boost of activity from your coffee. So, man, there's so many factors here that may be important to parse out, and certainly the folks who are doing studies are doing that with their various narrow studies. However, if we're just only referring to intake of coffee or caffeine or whatever, they may not really care about sleep. And if we're only caring about sleep, they probably don't care about caffeine. So, it's kind of hard to untangle. What should we do and how should we live?
But, my ability to maintain focus and produce high quality output work is dramatically dependent on the sleep that I've been having at night.
Me too.
That absolutely echoes what Professor Panda said a few weeks ago on this podcast. When he goes off caffeine, his productivity goes up. So guys, look, no one's asking you guys to cut out caffeine. I know how much you guys love it. I have certainly had my own love-hate relationship, well, more love of a relationship with coffee in the past, but I have dramatically reduced it and I'm feeling better than I've ever felt. Really hope you enjoyed that conversation.
I did enjoy
Please
it.
do think about one thing that you can take and apply into your life. Inspiration is not enough. You need to take action.
Inspiration ain't enough. Take action. Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, I think we're done. The stream is over. We've figured it out. All right. I just looked up caffeine and study. Maybe we can do a whole stream on doing research on caffeine. Yeah, it seems like a lot of work, honestly. Maybe not. Okay. Radio win. Man, that's a good idea, huh? What sort of radio would you want to listen to? Radio win. I don't know, man. I don't know. Suspense. I don't know. But for me right now, lunch is the time is currently. So I will be doing that. Hopefully you all are taking good care of yourselves, making sure to sleep well, making sure to not consume a lot of caffeine, or at least try to take care of your sleep patterns and make sure that your drugs are happening in the morning such that you don't mess up the rest of your day. I'm out of here. It's been a lot of fun. I think I'll be back on Friday. So I'll see you guys then.